In a dying industrial town where winter never quite leaves, a 13-year-old girl burst through the door of a biker garage with frost on her lips and terror in her eyes. She said four words that stopped two hardened men cold. "There isn't any food." What happened next would drag the Iron Shepherd Motorcycle Club into the darkest machinery of child exploitation this state had ever seen. A war fought not with fists but with documents, silence, and the kind of loyalty that only broken men understand. This is the story of Ember Quinn and the men who refuse to look away. Stay with us until the end. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. And let's ride. The Harley had been dead for 11 months. Declan Rourke knew that because he'd pulled the engine in February, right after the ground thawed enough to stop feeling like iron, and every morning since he'd come back to the same stripped frame sitting on jack stands in the middle of the garage floor like some kind of monument to unfinished things. He didn't rush it. Rushing was for men who still had somewhere to be. The garage sat at the dead end of Callaway Industrial Road, in the part of Hardin Falls that the city planners had stopped drawing maps of sometime in the early 90s. The buildings out here were the color of old ash, cinder block, and corrugated steel and chain-link fences wrapped in rust. In winter, which in this part of Ohio felt like 10 months out of 12, the wind came down off the ridge and moved through the gaps in the garage walls with a sound like something breathing. Declan had stuffed old rags in the worst of the gaps. It helped some, not enough. He was elbow deep in the engine casing, his forearms streaked black with grease, when Mason Vale came in from the cold with 2 cups of gas station coffee and set one on the workbench without being asked. Mason was the kind of man who didn't explain himself. 6'2", shoulders like a door frame, with a beard going gray at the corners, and a scar across his left eyebrow from a bar fight in Tulsa that nobody talked about anymore. He'd been riding with the Iron Shepherds for 9 years. He'd been riding with Declan for 12. There was a difference, and both of them understood it. "Carburetor's warped," Declan said, not looking up. "I know. I'm going to have to machine a new one." "I know that too." Declan set down the wrench. He picked up the coffee. The cup was too hot, and the coffee was terrible, and he drank it anyway, standing over the engine, staring at the damaged part like it had personally wronged him. Outside, the wind shoved against the garage door hard enough to rattle the chains. Mason pulled up a stool and sat. He had his own work, a set of brake calipers that needed rebuilding, but he didn't start on them. He just sat with the particular stillness that men learn after they've spent enough time in places where noise got people hurt. This was their rhythm. 2 men, 1 dead motorcycle, the sound of tools, and the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. It lasted until 12 minutes past 3 in the afternoon, when the side door exploded open and a girl fell through it. She didn't walk in. She didn't knock. She hit the door at full speed, nearly lost her footing on the concrete floor, grabbed the edge of a tool cabinet to keep from going down, and stood there with her chest heaving and her eyes moving fast around the space, checking exits, Declan noticed, the way a cornered animal checks exits, before those eyes landed on him and went still. 13? Maybe 14. Hard to tell. She was wearing a coat that was too thin for November and too large for her body, the sleeves pushed up so she could use her hands. Her boots were the kind that came from the donation bin at the church on Maple, mismatched laces, left sole starting to separate at the toe. Her face was angular, sharp-boned under hollow cheeks, and her hair was the color of old rust, pulled back and escaping in every direction. She looked like a girl who had not slept in a long time. She looked like she had run a very long way. The 3 of them were frozen inside a bubble of noise. The wind, the fluorescent lights buzzing, the sound of her breathing, and then she said it. "There isn't any food left." A pause. Her throat moved. "Please save my brothers." Declan set down the coffee cup. He did it slowly, carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have gone very steady and your mind has gone very quiet. He'd heard a lot of things in his life that he wished he could unhear. Firefights in places that didn't make it onto the evening news, a woman's voice through a phone line at 2 in the morning that turned out to be the last time he'd ever hear it. The sound of a judge's gavel in a courtroom in Indianapolis 6 years ago, ruling in favor of a system that was supposed to protect a child and instead had returned her to the man who was hurting her. He'd heard a lot of things. This one found the same place all of them went. somewhere behind the sternum, somewhere that didn't heal clean. Mason was already off his stool. "What's your name?" Declan asked. "Ember." She said it like she'd had to defend it before. "How old are your brothers?" 7, 9, and 11. Her jaw tightened. "They're not sick. There's been nothing since Wednesday. We had crackers. Those are gone too." Wednesday. Today was Saturday. Declan looked at Mason. Mason looked back. Neither of them said anything because there was nothing to say that the other one hadn't already thought. "Where?" Declan said. "Sycamore Arms. The apartment complex on Birch." "How far did you run?" She blinked, like the question surprised her. 11 blocks. In a coat too thin for November. In boots that were losing their soles. 11 blocks through hardened falls and the kind of cold that got into your joints and stayed there. Declan pulled his jacket off the hook by the door. He looked at her. "You warm enough to walk back?" She lifted her chin. "I ran here." He almost said something. He stopped himself. Instead, he grabbed the spare jacket, a lined flannel they kept for when club members showed up wet, and held it out to her without ceremony. She hesitated for exactly half a second before she took it, pulled it around herself, and said nothing. Which was, he thought, the right answer. Mason had his keys, Declan had his phone. They killed the lights in the garage, pulled the side door shut, and followed the girl back out into the cold. Well, the Sycamore Arms apartment complex had been built sometime in the 1970s, with the kind of optimism that urban renewal projects briefly produced, and it had been dying by degrees ever since. 6 buildings, 3 stories each, arranged around a central parking lot that was mostly empty and entirely desolate. The communal lighting had gone out in at least half the fixtures. The ones that still worked cast a yellow-gray pall over cracked concrete and dead grass. Ember moved fast. Declan and Mason kept up without pushing her, flanking her without crowding, staying close enough to matter, far enough to give her room. She didn't look back to check whether they were following. She moved like she'd already calculated that they were the only option she had left, and had made her peace with it. Building 4. 3rd floor. The elevator was broken, the stairwell smelled like mildew and cold air, and the carpet in the hallway was the color of an old bruise. Apartment 314 was at the end of the hall, door slightly ajar, the lock hasp visibly loose from the frame like it had been forced more than once. Ember pushed the door open and went in. What Declan noticed first was the silence. Not the comfortable silence of the garage, the particular silence of a space that people have stopped making noise in, because noise costs energy, and they don't have any left. Then he noticed the cold. The apartment was barely warmer than the hallway. A radiator sat against one wall, ticking occasionally, moving air but producing almost no heat. The windows were single pane, and the wind showed through in the way the curtain shifted slightly, even with the door closed. 3 boys were in the living room. The youngest was wrapped in what looked like every blanket in the apartment, sitting on the couch with his knees pulled up. The middle one was by the window, turned around when they came in, his face very still and very watchful. The oldest was standing in the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed, in a posture that Declan recognized immediately. The posture of a child who has decided, consciously or not, that since no adult is protecting them, they will attempt to protect everyone else. 11 years old, standing in a cold kitchen doorway with his arms crossed and his jaw set, trying to look like a wall. Declan had been 11 once. He recognized the expression. He had worn it himself. "It's okay," Ember said to her brothers. They came. The oldest one, dark hair, dark eyes, a bruise on his cheekbone that was yellow and fading, 3 or 4 days old, looked at Declan and Mason with the specific wariness of a child who has learned that adults making promises is not the same as adults keeping them. "Who are you?" he said. "My name's Declan." He didn't move into the room, didn't take up any more space than he already occupied. "What's yours?" A pause. "Cody?" "How long has the heat been like this, Cody?" Another pause. Longer this time. The boy calculating what it cost him to answer. 2 weeks, he said finally. "Is there anyone checking on you?" The look on Cody's face could only be described as ancient. The specific, exhausted ancientness of someone who has asked for help and received nothing so many times that the question has become almost meaningless. Our guardian's supposed to, he said. Ray, he comes when he wants. When did he come last? Cody turned away, looked at the wall. Ember said quietly, from somewhere behind Declan, 10 days ago. Mason was already on his phone, walking back toward the door, his voice low. Declan knew without asking who he was calling. Petra, who ran the food operation out of the back of Shepherd's Bar on Route 9, and Holt, who had a truck. Whatever the next 2 hours needed to look like, Mason was already arranging it. Declan sat down on the arm of the couch, not fully committing to being settled, just lowering himself enough that he wasn't looming over the small boy wrapped in blankets. The youngest one, 7, Ember had said, had enormous dark eyes and hadn't spoken yet. He was watching Declan with the intensity of someone taking inventory. You hungry? Declan asked him. A slow nod. Okay. Declan said it like a conclusion, not a promise. Promises were for later when there was something to back them up. We're going to fix that. The youngest kid, he'd find out his name was Leo later, reached out from inside his cocoon of blankets and put his hand on Declan's forearm. Just set it there. No explanation, no words. Declan looked down at the small hand, pale and cold against his tattooed forearm, and felt something shift in his chest that he couldn't immediately name. He didn't move. He just stayed where he was while Mason murmured into the phone in the hallway, and the wind pressed against the window glass, and the radiator ticked its useless rhythm. He stayed there until Holt's truck pulled into the parking lot 40 minutes later with 2 boxes of groceries, a space heater, and Naomi Cross in the passenger seat. Naomi had been with the Iron Shepherds for 3 years, which nobody who met her for the first time ever quite believed. She was 41, compact, with close-cropped natural hair and glasses she was always misplacing, and a voice that was permanently 2 notches lower than expected. Before the club, she'd spent 8 years as a licensed social worker for the state of Ohio, working child welfare cases in counties that were simultaneously underfunded and overwhelmed. She had left that job in a way she never fully described, but the way she described the leaving, carefully, economically, with exactly the number of words required, made it clear that it had broken something in her that she had since rebuilt into something different. She was the club's secretary, which meant she handled the administrative reality of everything the club did. Insurance, legal compliance, the nonprofit arm they'd incorporated 4 years ago, and the paperwork maze that governed any official interaction with the systems they regularly needed to outmaneuver. She was the most organized person Declan had ever known, and also the angriest, though she carried it so quietly most people never noticed. She came through the apartment door behind Holt, looked at the room, looked at the children, and didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she set her bag down on the kitchen table and said, to nobody in particular, I need to see their documents. Cody, who had watched everyone come in with that same careful stillness, said, What kind? Anything with names and dates, birth certificates, medical cards, school enrollment papers, whatever you have. Another long pause. Cody went to the bedroom and came back with a manila envelope that had been taped shut and retaped and was beginning to disintegrate at the corners. He held it out to Naomi. She took it with both hands, the way you take something that matters. While Petra and Holt put together a proper meal in the kitchen, real food, hot food, scrambled eggs and toast and soup from a can and canned peaches, Naomi sat at the kitchen table with the manila envelope and went through everything inside it with the focused quiet of someone running a forensic examination. Ember stood in the kitchen doorway, watching the food appear on the stove with an expression Declan couldn't look at directly. It was too naked, too much visible need in a face that had been trying to hide need for too long. Come eat, Petra said, not making a thing of it. Petra was 62 and had been feeding people since before some of the club members were born. She had a way of offering things that made them feel like no big deal, which was the only way certain people could accept them. Ember came into the kitchen. Declan stayed in the living room. He went to the window and looked out at the parking lot and thought about Ray, their guardian. The man who was supposed to be there. The man who had been gone for 10 days. He thought about the bruise on Cody's cheekbone. He thought about a 7-year-old boy with cold hands and ancient eyes. He thought about Naomi at the kitchen table, going through documents that had been taped and retaped inside a manila envelope, and the specific stillness of her face when she was finding something that confirmed the worst thing she had suspected. He didn't turn around when her chair scraped back and her footsteps crossed the kitchen floor and she appeared beside him at the window. "The guardian," she said very quietly. "Raymond Pruitt. His name is on the state foster license. And? There are benefit payment records in here going back 14 months. Her voice was controlled. Precise. Monthly stipends from 2 state programs plus a federal supplement. He's been drawing everything. Declan turned to look at her. How much? Enough. She paused. And there's an address. It's not this apartment. The wind outside found a gap somewhere in the building's exterior and moved through it with a sound like exhaling. He's not living here, Declan said. No. She looked at the parking lot. Her jaw moved. He's been collecting state money for a year and 2 months to house and care for 4 children, and he is not living here. Declan said nothing. He let the math of it sit in the space between them. What those children had been surviving on, what had been taken from them, how long it had been going on, and he felt the familiar pressure building behind his eyes that he had learned over many years to keep off his face. Where is he said. I don't know yet. She looked at him. But I will. They didn't leave that night, not right away. Mason ran to the hardware store before it closed and came back with weather stripping and caulk for the windows. And he and Holt spent an hour sealing the worst of the drafts, while Petra stayed in the kitchen and found enough in the boxes they'd brought to put together a second meal, because it became clear pretty quickly that the children were eating past what would normally stop them, which meant they'd been rationing much longer than 3 days. Declan didn't say anything about this. He just went back to the truck and got the extra box. Around 8 o'clock, the boys fell asleep. Not slowly, not reluctantly, the way children sometimes resist sleep, but with the sudden completeness of people whose bodies have been waiting for safety long enough that the moment it arrived, they collapsed into it. Leo went first, folded over onto the couch cushion with his cheek on his arm. The middle one. Marcus, 9 years old, who hadn't said more than 6 words all evening but had followed every adult movement in the room with careful dark eyes, lay down on the floor with one of the blankets and was asleep in minutes. Cody lasted longer. He sat in the kitchen doorway for a while, upright, refusing to give in to it, until sometime after 9 when Declan found him asleep in his chair with his chin on his chest, his arms still crossed. Ember did not sleep. She sat on the windowsill with her knees pulled up, looking out at the parking lot. The fluorescent lights outside turned the night a dirty amber. She had her arms wrapped around herself, fingers pressed into her own sleeves, and she was very still. Declan sat in the chair across the room and let her be still. He didn't try to make conversation. He just existed in the same space, which was sometimes all a person needed. Proof that someone else was there, that they didn't have to hold the whole night by themselves. After a long time, she said, "You're going to try to fix it." It wasn't a question. It wasn't quite relief either. "Yes," he said. "People say that." She kept looking out the window. Her voice was flat, not cruel, just worn down to the honest material underneath. 2 months ago, the school counselor said she was going to call someone. Last month, the woman downstairs said she'd talked to the building manager. A pause. 3 weeks ago, I called the child services number myself. Someone said they'd send someone to follow up. Declan waited. "Nobody came," she said. The words landed without drama, without self-pity, just fact. Nobody came. Filed and forgotten in a system that had more cases than it had workers, and more paperwork than it had time, and somewhere at the bottom of a pile, a number representing 4 children in a cold apartment in Hardin Falls. "I'm not going to call anyone," Declan said. "I'm going to stay here tonight. And tomorrow, Naomi is going to find out where Pruitt is. And then we're going to figure out what comes next." She turned her head to look at him. In the amber light from outside, she looked older than 13 and also exactly 13. The specific age of someone who has been forced to understand things they should not yet have to understand. "Why?" she said. He thought about several answers. He discarded most of them. "Because nobody came for you," he said. "And that's wrong." She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across her face. Not trust, not yet. Something shorter than trust. Something like the possibility that trust might eventually become available. Then she turned back to the window. Declan leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes. He didn't sleep either. Naomi left around midnight and came back at 6 in the morning with a laptop and a large coffee, and the look on her face she got when she'd spent the night running down a thread and found something at the end of it that she wished she hadn't. She sat down across from Declan and opened the laptop and turned it to face him. The screen showed a business registration. A name. ClearPath Family Services, LLC. Registered to Raymond Pruitt. He's not just fostering, Naomi said. Her voice was very quiet. ClearPath has filed paperwork in 3 counties as a private placement facilitator, meaning he represents himself as someone who can match children with prospective families, or manage temporary placement situations, or navigate custody arrangements outside the official system. Declan looked at the screen. Private placement facilitation. It's a real category of licensed service. Mostly it's legitimate. Adoption attorneys, accredited agencies, but operating outside the licensing requirements creates opportunities. She paused. I pulled his financial records. He has incoming payments from 12 separate individuals or entities over the past year. Not state payments, private payments. For what? She held his gaze. I don't know yet. The payments are categorized as consultation fees, but the amounts are... She stopped herself, looked at the screen. They're very large for consultation fees. Outside, the city was starting to produce its early morning sounds. A delivery truck somewhere, the first commuters, a dog. Inside the apartment, the 3 boys were still asleep. Ember had finally folded herself onto the couch, sometimes after 2. Declan looked at the business registration. He looked at the payment records. He looked at the 4 children sleeping under whatever blankets they had, while a man who was legally responsible for their welfare collected money from 12 different private sources for purposes that nobody had yet been able to name. How long until you know more? He said. Give me today. She pulled the laptop back. There are records in that envelope. School documents, medical records. They're all in his name as guardian. I know people at the county office. Not through the state system, through channels that don't leave a trail back to us. Okay? Declan. She waited until he looked at her. If this is what I think it is, tell me when you know, he said. Not before. She held his eyes for a moment. Then she nodded and opened her email and started making calls. Mason showed up at 7 with breakfast from the diner on Route 9. Eggs, hash browns, sausage, orange juice, and paper cups. He set everything on the kitchen table without announcement, and the smell of hot food moved through the apartment, and children appeared from various parts of it the way they do when food is suddenly present. Leo was the first one to the table. He climbed into a chair and looked at the spread with the kind of concentration that was almost painful to witness. He picked up a fork. He looked at Declan like he was asking permission. Go ahead, Declan said. Leo ate with the focused efficiency of someone who had recently learned in a visceral way that food was not guaranteed. Marcus sat beside him and ate in silence. Cody sat at the end of the table and ate slowly and carefully, which Declan suspected had less to do with manners and more to do with a stomach that had been empty too long. Ember ate standing at the counter. Her eyes moved between the food and the door in a rhythm that probably wasn't conscious anymore. The habit of a person who had been responsible for other people's safety long enough that she had stopped being able to eat without monitoring the exits. Mason caught Declan's eye across the table. His expression said everything. Declan looked at his coffee. After breakfast, Cody followed him into the living room and stood there with his arms crossed again. How long are you going to stay? He said. Until it's fixed, Declan said. Cody's jaw worked. There was something he wanted to say and was deciding whether to say it. Declan waited. Ray's coming back, Cody said. He does this. He leaves for a while and then he comes back. He paused. When he comes back, He's not... He stopped. The bruise on his cheekbone was yellow and fading, 3 or 4 days old, which meant it had happened before the last 10 days of absence, which meant Ray had been in this apartment as recently as 2 weeks ago. Declan made himself breathe evenly. He made himself keep his hands loose at his sides. When he comes back, Declan said carefully, we're going to be here. Cody looked at him with those ancient 11-year-old eyes. You don't know what he's like, he said. I've known men like him, Declan said. Something in Cody's face shifted. Not relief. He wasn't at a place where relief was available yet. Something more like recognition, like the specific language Declan had used. The flat acknowledgement without horror or disbelief had registered as a kind of truth. He didn't say anything else. He went back to the kitchen. Declan stood in the living room and stared at the wall where the wallpaper was peeling from the corner and thought about Raymond Pruitt, somewhere in this city, collecting private payments for consultation fees, while 4 children lived in a cold apartment with empty cupboards and a loose lock on the door. He thought about the child welfare case in Indianapolis. 6 years ago. The one that had been filed correctly, processed correctly, passed through every correct channel, and still resulted in a 6-year-old girl returned to a home that was not safe. He'd found out 8 months later, through a mutual contact, what had happened after that return. He had not forgiven himself for trusting the process. He had also not found a better answer yet. Maybe that was why, when Naomi called his phone at 2:47 that afternoon, and he heard the particular quality of silence on the line before she spoke, the silence of someone choosing their words very carefully, he already knew what she was going to say. I found something, she said, in the records, about ClearPath. A pause. Declan, I think he's been moving children. The garage was quiet. The dead Harley sat on its jack stands. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The wind moved through the rags stuffed in the gaps in the walls. I'm on my way, he said. He was halfway to his bike when his phone buzzed again. Text from Mason. Pruitt's been in contact with the apartment building manager. Gave a return date. He stopped walking. He typed back, when? The answer came in 30 seconds. 3 days. Declan looked at the phone. He looked at the sky, which was the flat white of a November afternoon with more cold coming. He looked at the road. 3 days. 3 days to understand exactly what Raymond Pruitt was running, to build something that would hold, to make sure that when he walked back through that door, he wouldn't be walking back out with those children. And somewhere on the other end of a phone line, Naomi was looking at documents that apparently showed something worse than a man who had neglected 4 kids for money. Declan put the phone in his pocket. He got on his bike. He kicked it to life and felt the engine come up under him, that low, familiar thunder in his chest, and he pulled out of the garage lot onto Callaway Road and rode toward whatever Naomi had found. He didn't know yet what it was going to cost them. He knew they were going to pay it. Naomi's apartment was on the 2nd floor of a building that smelled like old carpet and radiator heat, and she had been inside it for approximately 18 hours straight based on the number of coffee cups on the table and the particular hollowness around her eyes when she opened the door. She didn't say hello. She stepped back and let Declan in and went straight to the table where her laptop was open, and 3 separate legal pads were covered in her handwriting. Tight, precise, the kind of notes that meant she'd been circling something for hours, coming at it from different angles, not satisfied with what she was finding. Declan pulled off his jacket and sat down across from the laptop. He looked at the screen. He looked at it for a long time. The document was a custody transfer agreement, private, not a state form. The language was carefully constructed to look like a legitimate private guardianship arrangement, the kind that sometimes happened in families. A parent designating a trusted relative or family friend as temporary guardian. Except the family involved in this agreement had no relationship to Raymond Pruitt, and the payment notation at the bottom listed $15,000, transferred to an LLC that Declan did not recognize, which turned out upon examination to be a shell registered in Delaware with no physical address and a single officer, a name Naomi had circled 3 times in red ink, Victor Hale. Who is he? Declan said. I don't know yet. Naomi sat down across from him. She put her glasses on and pulled the laptop back toward herself. The LLC has been active for 4 years. It's received deposits from 11 different sources in that time. Some of the sources trace back to individuals in 3 different states. Some of them trace back to other shell entities. The money goes in clearly, and then it moves. Redistributed, layered, hard to follow, without more tools than I have right now. But the custody agreement goes through Pruitt. Pruitt is the intake point, she said. He identifies the children. He creates the documentation. He's licensed as a foster guardian, which gives him legal standing to initiate certain kinds of placement processes. She paused. He's been doing this for at least 2 years. Based on the documents in that envelope, the Quinn children were not the first. The apartment was very quiet. A pipe somewhere in the building knocked twice and went silent. "How many?" Declan said. Naomi took her glasses off. She set them on the table. She pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose and held them there for a moment. "I found paperwork traces for at least 6 children," she said, "over 22 months. The documentation in each case was legitimate on its surface: temporary placement arrangements, consent forms, transfer agreements, everything signed, everything dated." She looked at him. "But the receiving parties in those agreements are not licensed foster families. They're not accredited placement organizations. They're individuals and entities that paid into Victor Hale's LLC. Declan put his hands flat on the table. He made himself look at the documents. He made himself read the language, the careful bureaucratic language that dressed what it was in the vocabulary of legitimate care. Temporary placement. Best interest of the child. Facilitated transition. "He's selling them," Declan said. "Flat, final." "I believe so." Her voice was equally flat. "I believe he has been selling private custody access, possibly more. And the legal framework he's built is designed to make it look like a legitimate service at every point of contact." She paused. "The Quinn children are the most recent, which means Pruitt is going to return to that apartment with a buyer already identified." Declan stood up. He walked to the window and stood with his back to the room and looked at the street below, at the amber pools of streetlight on wet pavement, at the empty road. He had a specific sensation in his chest that he had learned to recognize. It wasn't rage, exactly. It was something older and colder than rage, the recognition of something monstrous that had been operating in the ordinary world for a long time, dressed in the ordinary language of paperwork and process, invisible until someone decided to look hard enough. "The police," he said. "I've thought about that." Naomi's voice was careful. "We don't have enough yet. What I have is a custody agreement that could be argued as legitimate without a forensic financial investigation behind it. The LLC shell structure will take time to unravel. The individuals who receive children through this network, we don't know their names, we don't know their locations, we don't know what happened after the transfers." She stopped. "If we go to local PD with what we have right now, there is a reasonable chance that Pruitt's attorney argues the documents are legitimate, that he's released pending investigation, and that he disappears with the children before anyone can stop him." Declan turned around. He looked at her. 3 days, he said. "Yes." "We have 3 days to build something that doesn't fall apart." "Yes." He picked up his jacket off the chair. He stood for a moment looking at the table covered in documents, legal pads, coffee cups, the detritus of a night spent trying to understand the architecture of something ugly. "Get some sleep," he said. She gave him a look that suggested she would not be taking that advice. He left. The garage was dark when he got back. He didn't turn on the main lights. He sat on the stool by the workbench in the dark and put his phone on the wood surface and looked at it. Then he called Mason. Mason picked up on the second ring. "How bad?" "Bad," Declan said. A long pause. The sound of wind on Mason's end. He was outside somewhere. "How many kids?" "6 that Naomi can confirm, probably more." Another pause. Longer. "Give me an hour," Mason said. He hung up. Declan sat in the dark. He listened to the wind move through the garage walls. He listened to the Harley on the jack stands, which obviously made no sound because it was a stripped engine on a frame. But there was something about the presence of it in the dark that he'd always found grounding. The weight of metal, the logic of mechanics. Something wrong with a machine could be diagnosed, could be fixed if you were patient and honest about what you were finding. He thought about Indianapolis. He thought about the case file he'd handed over to the right people, through the right channels, with complete confidence that the system would do what the system was designed to do. He thought about what the system had done instead. His phone lit up. Text from a number he didn't have saved, which meant it was Reuben Voss, who never let anyone save his number. Heard you've got a situation. Shepherds, 9 p.m. Declan looked at the text. He thought about what it meant that Voss already knew, which meant Mason had already made calls before Declan called him, which meant Mason had seen this coming before Declan had finished driving back from Naomi's. He put the phone down. He got up and turned on the work light over the Harley. He picked up a wrench and stood over the engine and did not work on it. He just stood there with the wrench in his hand and the white light over the chrome parts and let himself feel the full weight of what was coming. Bob. Shepherd's Bar occupied the ground floor of a building on Route 9 that had been a hardware store, and before that a feed warehouse, and before that something nobody could remember. The sign outside had lost 2 letters years ago, and nobody had replaced them. The interior was dark wood and older neon, a long bar along one wall, pool tables in the back, and a room off the kitchen that had no sign on the door and that the bikers used for meetings. By 9:15 there were 7 men in that room: Declan, Mason, Reuben Voss, who was 53 and built like a man who had spent decades absorbing impacts and found them disappointing; Holt Decker, who was primarily muscle but who had been with the Iron Shepherds since the founding and whose opinion therefore carried weight beyond his silence; Theo Park, who handled the club's technical operations and whose background before the Iron Shepherds was something he had described once as government work and never elaborated on; Carter Briggs, who was 31 and the newest full patch and who sometimes still tried too hard in rooms like this one and who had been working very visibly to stop doing that; and Lyle Cross, Naomi's older brother, who rode with the club and who was the only member who had known Naomi before any of them and who therefore understood certain things about her that the rest of them were still catching up to. Naomi was not in the room. Declan had not asked why. He laid it out. Flat, fast, no editorializing. Pruitt, clear path. Victor Hale. The custody agreement. The 6 confirmed children. The financial structure. The 3-day window. When he finished, the room was quiet. Voss was the first to speak. He had a way of speaking that sounded like gravel settling. Slow, heavy, inevitable. "The buyers," he said. "Do we know who they are?" "Not yet," Declan said, "but Naomi thinks she can find them." "She's working on it." Voss nodded once and said nothing else for a while. He was looking at the table's surface. Declan knew that look. Voss was running calculations, not about whether to act, but about what acting at the wrong moment would cost them. He had been in situations before where the right impulse at the wrong time had made things worse for the people they were trying to help. That history made him slow in a way that some people read as cold, and that Declan read as the opposite. "We need everything Naomi has," Voss said finally, "and we need more. The financial records aren't enough without the destination." "I know." "If we move on Pruitt before we know who Hale is and where the other kids went—" "I know," Declan said again. "We don't move on Pruitt. We build the case. We have 3 days. Carter Briggs shifted in his seat. He was sitting at the end of the table with his hands flat on the surface and a specific quality of controlled agitation that Declan recognized as a young man who was very angry and knew better than to let it out in this room. 3 days, Carter said, and 4 kids are in that apartment right now. Holt and Petra are there, Mason said, around the clock. That's not what I... Carter stopped himself. He looked at the table. They're 11, 9, 7, and 13, and we're sitting in a bar running a timeline. Nobody responded to this. Not because it wasn't true, but because it was true in the way that many things about the situation were true, and the answer to it was not a counterargument, but the same work that the room was already committed to. Voss looked at Carter. You want to go knock Pruitt's door down, he said. I understand that. I also understand that the moment we become the story, the children become secondary to the story. If this goes wrong on our end, Pruitt's attorney uses us to muddy the water until every piece of evidence Naomi has becomes a question about our methods instead of his. He paused. We don't get to be angry right now. We get to be useful. Carter held Voss's gaze for a moment. Then he looked away. What do you need from me? He said. Be available, Voss said. Be patient. He didn't say it harshly. He said it the way someone passed on something they had learned at significant personal cost. And stay off the phone. Theo Park had been quiet through all of this. He was leaning back in his chair with his arms folded and his eyes slightly unfocused in the way he got when he was processing something. The Shell LLC, he said. Delaware registration. I need the entity name and the registered agent. I'll get it from Naomi tonight, Declan said. If it's layered the way she's describing, there may be digital trails. Transfer metadata, registration timestamps. It takes time, but it's not invisible. He unfolded his arms. Give me what you have in 48 hours. You've got 36, Declan said. Theo's mouth moved, not quite a smile. Then I'll need more coffee than this establishment provides. Lyle Cross had been sitting in the corner with the particular stillness of a man listening to a conversation about his sister's safety and choosing not to make that the center of the room. He was 44, lean and weathered, with the same close-cropped hair as Naomi and the same quality of compressed watchfulness. He hadn't spoken yet. Lyle, Declan said. Lyle looked at him. She's all right, Declan said. Not a question. She's not all right, Lyle said evenly. She's fine. Those aren't the same thing. He looked at the table. She spent 8 years watching the state lose kids in paperwork. She quit because she found a case where the social worker knew and filed the report, and the report went into a system that was so backed up it took 4 months to process, and by then the child had been moved to a different county and the case got lost in the transfer. He paused. She built something else when she left. She's going to want to do this right, but she's also going to want to do it fast. You'll have to manage that balance. That's why I need you in contact with her, Declan said. Not to slow her down, to make sure she doesn't get ahead of what we can back up. Lyle nodded once. The meeting lasted another 20 minutes. Tasks were assigned, timelines were confirmed, nobody shook hands or made speeches. They filed out through the bar in ones and twos, and Declan stayed until the room was empty, and then he sat there for a few minutes in the silence, looking at the table where nothing was written, but where the shape of the operation existed now, in the shared understanding of 7 men who had agreed to move together on something that mattered. He thought about Carter Briggs, the anger in his hands, the effort it had cost him to stay in his seat. He thought, I was that once. I know what it took to stop being it. He wasn't sure whether it had made him better or just quieter. The next morning started at 5:30 with a call from Holt. The building manager came by, Holt said. His voice was low, which meant he was in the hallway outside the apartment. Asked me who I was. I told him I was a friend of the family. What did he say? He said Pruitt had called. Said he'd be back day after tomorrow, not 3 days. A pause. Declan? He said Pruitt mentioned bringing some people with him, said they needed to finalize some arrangements with the kids. Declan was already sitting up. He'd slept 4 hours on the couch in the garage with his jacket over him. His back informed him of this with detailed specificity. 2 days, he said. 2 days, Holt confirmed. Don't let anyone in that apartment except us. I know. Is Petra with them? She just got here with breakfast. Good. He paused. How are they? A pause on Holt's end. A different kind of pause than the operational ones. The pause of a man choosing whether to answer the question he'd been asked or the question underneath it. Cody didn't sleep, Holt said. He was up all night. Sat in the kitchen. I found him at 4 a.m, just sitting there in the dark. Another pause. He asked me if we were going to be there when Pruitt came back. I told him yes. He said, Holt stopped. What did he say? He said last time he tried to fight back, Pruitt told him he'd split the family up, put them in different homes. Said he had the paperwork already. Holt's voice was steady, the way his voice got when steadiness was a professional requirement. 11 years old. Declan closed his eyes. He opened them. He looked at the garage wall. I'll be there in an hour, he said. He hung up. He sat for a moment with the phone in his hand. Then he called Naomi. She picked up immediately, which meant she hadn't slept. 2 days, he said. I heard. She was already somewhere else in her head, he could tell. She was looking at something on her screen while she talked. It accelerates things, but it doesn't change the approach. I need 24 more hours on the financial records. Theo's working the digital trail. If we can tie Hale to at least 2 of the prior transfers with hard documentation, that's a foundation a DA could build on. What do you need from me today? The school, she said. Birch Street Elementary and Hardin Falls Middle School. The kids were enrolled, which means there are attendance records, teacher observations, welfare check notes. Schools are mandatory reporters. If anything was documented and not followed up on, that's part of the neglect case. I need those records. You can't access them directly. No, but there's a woman at Birch Street who I worked with on 2 cases when I was still with the state. Her name is Mrs. Adeliki. She's been there for 20 years, and she's the kind of person who doesn't forget a child she's worried about. A pause. I think she'll talk to you, if you go in person. Why me and not you? Because you're going to bring Ember, Naomi said, and because Mrs. Adeliki is going to need to see that the children have someone. Declan thought about this, about what it meant to bring a 13-year-old girl to her school, to talk about what had happened to her and her brothers, about what it cost a person, at 13, to walk back into a place where adults had known something was wrong and hadn't known enough, or done enough, or followed through. Does Ember know about the school records? He said. Not yet. I'll ask her, he said. I'm not bringing her somewhere without asking her. I know, Naomi said. That's why I'm sending you. Ember said yes. She said it the way she said most things, without excess, without visible emotion, with a kind of deliberate economy that Declan was starting to understand was not coldness, but the posture of someone who had learned to conserve everything. She changed into her better coat, the slightly less thin one, and she braided her hair with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing it without a mirror for a long time. She checked on her brothers before they left. Leo still eating, Marcus watching Saturday morning cartoons on the small television that Petra had thought to bring, Cody in the kitchen pretending to read a comic book while actually monitoring the door. We'll be back in 2 hours, Ember told Cody. He looked up from the comic, looked at Declan. Something moved across his face, the specific, reluctant calculation of a child deciding whether to extend the minimum necessary increment of trust. Okay, he said. He went back to the comic. They walked to the school because Declan judged that a motorcycle was not the right approach for this particular errand, and his truck was at the garage. It was cold, properly cold, with a sky the flat white of skim milk, and the kind of air that got into your lungs and stayed there. Ember walked fast. Declan matched her pace without comment. 3 blocks from the school, she said, without looking at him. Mrs. Adelaki called the hotline twice. Declan looked at her. In September and October, Ember said. She pulled me out of class both times to ask me questions. I knew what she was doing. I told her things were fine. A pause. Her jaw worked. Because the first time Pruitt found out someone had called, he came home and he told Cody that if another call came in, they'd put us somewhere separate, different homes. She stopped walking. She stood on the sidewalk with her hands in her pockets. She was looking at the middle distance, somewhere between the ground and the horizon. So the second time Mrs. Adelake asked, I told her it was fine. Declan stopped beside her. I lied, she said, to the person who was trying to help us. She said it with a flatness that was not self-pity and not seeking absolution, just the particular weight of a truth that she had been carrying. So when you talk to her, she's going to know that I lied to her. I thought you should know that I know. He thought about several things to say. He said, You were protecting your brothers. She turned and looked at him. Her eyes were the color of creek water in winter, brown-gray, clear, very still. It still didn't work, she said. No, he said. But that's not on you. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she turned and kept walking toward the school. Declan fell into step beside her. He did not tell her it was going to be okay. He did not tell her she was brave. He walked beside her in the cold, and when they reached the school's side entrance and she stopped and took one breath, a single deliberate breath, before she pushed the door open, he stayed 2 steps back and let her go first. Mrs. Adelake was 60-something and wide-shouldered with reading glasses on a beaded cord and the particular quality of presence that certain teachers developed after decades in schools. A gravitational pull, a way of occupying a room that made you feel the room had been waiting for her. She met them in the hallway outside the main office and looked at Ember for a long moment. before she said anything. Then she said, "Baby." Ember went rigid. For a moment it looked like she was going to step back, and then something gave way. Not dramatically, not with tears, just a visible relaxing of a tension that had been held for a very long time, and she let Mrs. Adeleke put a hand on her shoulder. They went into an empty classroom. The three of them sat at student desks, absurdly small for Declan, and Mrs. Adeleke listened while Declan explained what they were trying to build. He was honest about what they had and what they needed. He was honest about the timeline. She was quiet for a moment when he finished. Then she opened the drawer of the teacher's desk in the corner and took out a folder. "I kept copies," she said, "of everything I filed. The hotline reports, my written observations, the attendance records. 14 absences in the first 2 months of school. Twice I saw bruising. 3 times I observed what I considered indicators of food insecurity." She set the folder on the desk between them. "I was told both times that a worker had been assigned. I followed up twice and was told the case was in process." She looked at Declan. "I did not believe it was in process, but I am a school teacher, not an investigator, and the 3rd time I followed up I was told that the family had indicated they were fine." Ember was looking at her hands. "I am sorry," Mrs. Adeleke said to Ember, directly, clearly. "I am sorry that I could not do more. I am sorry the system—" She paused, and the pause held years of frustration compressed into a half-second. "Did what the system does." Ember nodded. She didn't speak. Declan picked up the folder. "I need to make copies." "Take the originals," Mrs. Adeleke said. "I made copies for myself. What's there is yours." She looked at him with the steady gaze of someone who was committing to a direction. "What else do you need?" "Any names," Declan said. "Anyone who interacted with Pruitt directly. Anyone who might have documentation of contact." She thought for a moment. "The nurse and the PE teacher. Pruitt came in once to pick up Marcus. The PE teacher had concerns. I'll call them today." She paused. "There's also the woman in the apartment below them, Mrs. Vargas. She's called the building manager about the children 3 times. I know because she came to me when the calls didn't produce anything." Declan made a note on his phone. They left the school 30 minutes later. Ember was quiet for the first block. Then she said, "She kept the files." "Yes," Declan said. "She kept them for 2 months even though nobody was listening." A pause. She was still trying. "Yes." Ember was quiet again. Then, "Do you think it'll be enough?" He thought about the folder under his arm. He thought about Theo Park in his apartment running financial traces. He thought about Naomi and 24 hours and the shape of what they were building. "I think," he said carefully, "that it's not enough by itself, but it's one more piece, and right now we're stacking pieces." She nodded slowly. She walked for another half block. "Naomi was a social worker before," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Is that why she left?" Ember said. "Because of something like this?" Declan looked at the road ahead. He thought about what Lyle had told him in the back room at Shepherd's, about a child moved between counties, about a report lost in a backlogged system. "Something like this," he said. Ember didn't say anything else. When they got back to the apartment, she went straight to Leo and sat down beside him on the couch, and didn't say anything. Just sat there in contact, shoulder to shoulder, the way people sit with each other when they have been somewhere difficult and need to feel that the people they love are still there. Declan set the folder on the kitchen table where Holt was drinking coffee and told him what they had. Holt looked at the folder. He looked at Declan. "She's something," he said quietly, meaning Ember. "She's surviving," Declan said. "There's a difference." His phone buzzed. Theo Park. Found the first transfer. Bank metadata links Hales LLC to a payment originating in Cuyahoga County 18 months ago. Cross-referencing with Naomi's custody agreement now. "This is real, Declan. This is a network." He read it twice. Then he called Theo back. "How solid," he said. "Solid enough that I'd take it to someone I trusted," Theo said. "Not solid enough for someone I didn't." "Who do we trust?" Declan said. It was a genuine question. It was also, Declan knew, the question that everything else depended on. Because the chain of evidence Naomi and Theo were building was only as good as the hands it ended up in, and they had exactly one chance to put it in the right ones. Theo was quiet for a moment. "You know who I'm going to say." "Renner," Declan said. "You haven't talked to her in 2 years." "I know." "She picked up your last call?" "No," Declan said. "She didn't." He looked at the kitchen, at Holt and the folder and the sounds of the children in the next room. "But I'm going to try again." He hung up. He looked at his contacts. He found the name. He looked at it for a long moment. Detective Sergeant Yolanda Renner, Hardin Falls PD, Major Crimes. The last time they had spoken, it had not ended well. It had ended in a parking lot at 2 in the morning, with Renner telling him that she understood what he was trying to do and that she could not be part of it, and that if he called her on this number again, she was going to have to pretend she didn't know him. He had called her anyway, 3 days later. She hadn't answered. He pressed call. It rang 4 times. 5. He was preparing for voicemail when the line connected, and she said, in the flat, controlled voice of someone who had just looked at their screen and made a decision they might regret, "This better be something I can't ignore." "It is," Declan said. A long pause. "Where?" she said. He told her. He told her Shepherd's, in the back room, 9 tonight. Another pause. Long enough that he thought she was going to say no. "I'll be there," she said. She hung up. Declan stood in the kitchen of an apartment where 4 children who had been sold, or nearly sold, were eating lunch and watching television and slowly, cautiously, beginning to believe that the floor might hold. One day left. One day to finish building something that would hold against lawyers and shell companies, and a man who had turned the language of child welfare into the architecture of exploitation. And now a detective who had every reason not to trust him was going to walk into his bar and look at what they had. And he was going to have to convince her that this time the thing he was handing her was solid. The thing he wasn't going to tell her, not yet, not until the meeting, not until he could read her face, was what Naomi had found in the last hour. A 7th name. Not a past transfer, not a historical record, a current one. An agreement dated 6 days ago with a receiving party Naomi had tentatively identified as being located 90 miles north of Hardin Falls, signed by Raymond Pruitt. Notarized, waiting. Waiting for children. Waiting for... The 7th name was the child named Daniel Marsh. Naomi had found him at 11:47 the previous night, buried inside a custody transfer agreement that Pruitt had filed under ClearPath's letterhead with a notary stamp from a UPS store on the east side of Hardin Falls. Daniel Marsh, age 9, currently enrolled in 3rd grade at Kettering Elementary, 14 miles from where the Quinn children were sleeping. His legal guardian on record was a woman named Sandra Marsh. Aunt, court-appointed, granted emergency guardianship 8 months ago following the death of both parents in a car accident on Route 77. Sandra Marsh had signed a voluntary relinquishment of guardianship 4 weeks ago. The receiving party on the transfer agreement was listed as a residential care organization called Brightfield Family Placement, with an address in a town called Dorset, 91 miles north. The agreement was notarized, dated, and waiting for one thing: the signature of a family court liaison who would formally close the transfer. Naomi had spent 2 hours trying to verify Brightfield Family Placement. It did not exist. The address in Dorset was a vacant commercial property that had been available for lease since the previous spring. The organizational registration number on the letterhead traced to a nonprofit that had been dissolved in another state 3 years ago. The phone number on the document rang to a voicemail box that had never been set up. Daniel Marsh was 9 years old, and he was scheduled to be transferred to an organization that existed only on paper in 4 days. Declan read all of this on his phone at 6:15 in the morning, standing in the kitchen of the Quinn apartment with cold coffee and the particular clarity of a man who had not slept enough and was running on something harder than caffeine. Naomi had sent it in a series of texts starting at midnight and ending at 3:12 with a single line. "This isn't just Pruitt. Someone is running this above him." He had read that last line 5 times. He was reading it again when Holt came in from the living room and looked at his face and said, "What?" "Get Mason," Declan said, "and call Theo. Tell him we need everything he has on Brightfield Family Placement, Dorset, Ohio, right now." Holt didn't ask questions. He went to the door. Declan looked out the kitchen window at the parking lot. The sky was doing what November skies in Ohio did, pressing down, flat and gray, the kind of cloud cover that made it feel like permanent dusk. A thin rain had started sometime overnight and was still falling, not hard enough to justify an umbrella, hard enough to make everything look like it was sweating. He thought about Daniel Marsh, 9 years old, parents dead. Aunt who had signed something she probably didn't understand, an organization that didn't exist waiting to receive him in 4 days. He thought about the 6 confirmed children before the Quinn kids. He thought about what Theo had said. This is a network. He thought about what Naomi had said. Someone is running this above him. He made himself stop thinking and start moving. The meeting that morning was not at Shepherd's. It was at the garage because Declan needed it on ground he controlled, and because the garage had the benefit of being a place where nobody came without being invited, and where the walls were thick enough that voices didn't carry. They came in by 7:30. Mason, Theo, Naomi, Voss, and Lyle. Carter Briggs showed up uninvited, and Declan let him stay because there was no time to manage exclusions. Naomi stood at the workbench with her laptop and the Quinn children's documents spread across the surface that Declan had cleared by moving engine parts to the floor. She went through it methodically, efficiently, without editorializing. The ClearPath documents, Victor Hale's LLC, the 6 prior transfers, the 7th agreement, Brightfield, the non-existent address, the dissolved non-profit registration. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Rain tapped against the garage roof in an uneven rhythm. One of the fluorescent tubes overhead flickered. Voss said, "How many people know about this outside this room?" "Renner," Declan said. "I called her last night. She's coming in this morning." Before the meeting at Shepherd's. That meeting was for last night. She came at 9. We talked until almost midnight. He paused. She took the financial documentation. She said she needed to make calls before she could tell us what she could do with it. Theo had been staring at his own laptop since Naomi finished talking. He looked up now. "Brightfield is a ghost," he said. "The registration traces to an entity called Meridian Care Partners. Meridian Care Partners traces to a holding company in Nevada. The holding company has one officer of record." He turned the laptop to face the room. "That officer's name is Gerald Aiken." Nobody said anything. Naomi went very still. "Naomi," Lyle said quietly. She was looking at the name on the screen. Her face had not changed in any visible way. It was doing the thing it did when she was processing something that required containment. But her right hand, which had been resting on the edge of the workbench, moved to grip it. Just the knuckles. Just white, and then not white again. "Naomi," Declan said. "Do you know that name?" She let out a breath through her nose. She looked at him. "Gerald Aiken," she said, "was the deputy director of the Cuyahoga County Child Welfare Division for 11 years. A pause. The quality of the pause was surgical. "He retired 18 months ago." Another pause. "I worked under him for 4 of my 8 years with the state." The rain tapped the roof. The fluorescent tube flickered. "He was—" She stopped. She pressed her fingers harder against the workbench edge. "He was the person who told me the case was in process. The child in Cuyahoga County that I told Declan about. The report that was lost in the transfer." She looked at the laptop screen. "I filed that report to Gerald Aiken's division. He told me personally, on the phone, that a worker had been assigned." She looked up. Her voice was flat, but underneath the flatness was something tightly coiled and very dangerous. There was no worker. The report disappeared. I found out 8 months later what happened to that child. Declan looked at her. He held her gaze. "He wasn't negligent," she said. Quiet. Final. "He was managing it. He was deciding which reports went forward and which ones got lost, and the ones that got lost were the ones that fed this pipeline." She looked back at the screen. "He's been doing this for 11 years, at minimum." The number sat in the room like something with mass. 11 years. Declan thought about the 6 confirmed transfers through Pruitt's ClearPath operation. If Aiken had been running an intake management system for 11 years, not just in Hardin Falls, not just in Cuyahoga County, The 6 names were not the count. They were the visible edge of something that went down a long way into darkness. Mason, who had been standing against the wall with his arms folded and his face completely unreadable, said, "How far does it go?" "I don't know yet," Theo said. He sounded like a man who was starting to understand that the answer was going to be worse than the question. "The holding company in Nevada has connections I haven't fully traced. There are at least 3 other LLCs with overlapping registered agents. If Aiken structured this the way it looks like he structured it, there are going to be nodes in multiple counties, maybe multiple states." "Victor Hale," Declan said. "Hale is the money," Theo said. "He's collecting from the buyers and distributing to the operators. Aiken is the infrastructure. He's the man who made sure the official system didn't interfere." He paused. "Pruitt is a contractor. He's one of several, I think. He finds children, creates the documentation, handles the local transfer. He gets a fee. Hale handles the rest." "The buyers," Voss said. "Still working on it," Theo said. "The financial obfuscation on the buyer side is more sophisticated than the operator side. Whoever set this up understood that the most dangerous exposure point was the end destination." He looked at Voss. "I need more time." "How much?" "Hours, not days." Voss looked at Declan. Declan looked at the time on his phone. It was 7:58 in the morning. Pruitt was returning in approximately 36 hours. Daniel Marsh had 4 days. "Renner," Declan said. "I need to call her right now." He stepped out of the garage into the rain. He stood on the cracked asphalt lot with cold water moving down the back of his neck and called Renner's number. She picked up on the first ring. "I was going to call you," she said. "Aiken," Declan said. A pause. A pause with texture to it. The kind of pause that was not surprise. "You know," he said. "I've suspected," she said carefully, "for about 14 months. I couldn't prove anything. Whenever I got close to a case that should have connected upward, the documentation would be incomplete or the chain of custody would have a gap I couldn't account for." Her voice was controlled, tight. "I have a partial internal complaint filed with the Department Oversight Board. It's been pending for 6 months." "6 months?" "Yes." "Does anyone else know you filed it?" Another pause. This one was different. "Renner," Declan said. "I filed it through the standard channel," she said, "which means it was routed through the Deputy Director's office for initial review before going to oversight." A pause. "Not Aiken's office. He's retired. His successor." "Do you trust the successor?" The pause this time was the longest yet. "I don't know," she said. Declan stood in the rain. He could feel the cold moving through his jacket. He could feel the weight of everything Naomi had said. 11 years, decisions made about which children were found and which were lost, a system with a leak in it that someone had been exploiting for over a decade. "Someone needs to know about this outside Hardin Falls," he said. "Someone above the county level." "I know that," she said. "I've been trying to figure out how to do it without—" She stopped. "Without what?" "Without making it disappear again," she said quietly. The rain came down. A truck moved past on Route 9, throwing spray. "I have someone," Declan said. "Federal level. I've never used this contact. I've been holding it for something that required it." He paused. "I think this requires it." "Who?" Renner said. "I'll tell you when I know she'll take the call," he said. "Give me an hour." He hung up. He stood in the rain for a moment longer, then he went back into the garage. Everyone was looking at him. "I need the room," he said, "except Naomi." People moved. Mason went last, and before he went, he looked at Declan in the particular way that meant, "I'm right outside, whatever you need." Declan nodded. The door closed. The garage was quiet. Rain on the roof, the fluorescent flicker, the dead Harley on its jack stands. Naomi was looking at him. "I need to ask you something," Declan said. "And I need you to be honest, even if the answer is hard." "Ask." "When you worked under Aiken, the cases that went missing, the reports that went into the system and didn't come out the other side, is there any chance he had reason to know about you specifically? Your methods, your contacts, the way you investigated?" He looked at her directly. Is there any chance he knew, at the time, that you were the one who was close to the cases that were disappearing? She looked at him for a long time. Yes, she said. I think he knew. Why? Because the last case, she said. The child in Cuyahoga. I didn't just file the report. I went to Aiken's office. I sat down with him. I told him exactly what I'd found and exactly what I believed was happening and exactly what I needed the division to do. She paused. He listened. He was very calm. He thanked me. He told me he would handle it personally. Her jaw worked. 2 weeks later, the report was lost in transfer. 3 weeks after that, I was reassigned to a different district. 1 month after that, I resigned. The rain. The flickering light. He knew your face, Declan said. Yes. And you've been working with the Iron Shepherds for 3 years, he said. On cases that touched child welfare. On cases that ran adjacent to the kinds of networks he was operating. She held very still. If Aiken is connected to what's happening here, Declan said, and if anyone in his network has been monitoring the kinds of activities that would attract attention, the food operation, the assistance work, the cases we've looked into. He might know I'm here, Naomi said. The words landed in the space between them, and neither of them moved. He might know you're here, Declan said. He might know what you found. He might have known before we started. She breathed in slowly, out slowly. Her hands were flat on the workbench. There's something else, she said. Her voice had gone very quiet. Something I haven't told you yet because I wasn't sure what it meant. Tell me now. She reached into her bag and took out a printed page. Something she'd printed at home recently, the paper still slightly warm-looking in the cold of the garage. She put it on the workbench between them. It was a photograph, printed from a digital source, grainy from the enlargement. It showed a parking lot. The parking lot of the Sycamore Arms, taken from above at an angle, probably from a phone, probably from a window in the building. It showed Declan's truck. It showed Holt's truck. It showed Declan and Ember walking back from the direction of the school. It had been texted to Naomi's personal number at 4:17 that morning. The sending number was blocked. Declan looked at the photograph. He looked at it for a long time. Someone had been watching the apartment. Someone had been watching long enough to know which vehicles belonged to who, and to photograph the comings and goings, and to send that photograph to Naomi's private number, a number that was not publicly connected to the Iron Shepherds, not associated with her by any record that a casual inquiry would surface, a number that Gerald Aiken, who had known her professionally for 4 years, might have been able to find. When did you get this? He said. 4:17, she said. I called Lyle immediately. He's been driving the perimeter of Sycamore Arms since 5. Why didn't you tell me first thing this morning? Because I needed to understand what it meant before I said it in a room full of people who are already at their limit, she said, and because I wasn't sure. Are you sure now? She looked at the photograph. We're being watched, she said. Whoever is watching us knows we're on to Pruitt. If they know that, they know there's risk that the transfer gets disrupted, which means they'll move faster, Declan said. Yes. Not 36 hours. No, she said. Maybe much less. Declan picked up the photograph. He looked at it once more. His own truck, in the parking lot, in grainy morning light. His own face, turned slightly toward Ember, the school folder under his arm. Someone with access to Naomi's private number had watched them and taken a photograph and sent it in the middle of the night. Not a threat. No words, no demand, no escalation. Just, we see you. Just the specific chill of being observed by someone who wanted you to know you were being observed and was not yet ready to tell you what they intended to do about it. He set the photograph down. Theo, he said. He went to the door and opened it. Theo was in the lot, standing in the rain with his collar up on his phone. He looked up. The photograph Naomi received, Declan said. Can you run the metadata? She already sent it to me, Theo said. I'm working it now. He paused. The image was taken on a device that has location services disabled, but the image file has a creation timestamp and a device fingerprint. He looked at his phone. The device fingerprint matches a model sold primarily through corporate procurement channels. It's the kind of device, he paused, chose words carefully, that institutions purchase for staff. Declan looked at him. Someone with an institutional device, Theo said, took that photograph, which means someone with institutional affiliation has been physically present at or near the Sycamore Arms. Institutional could be anything, could be a county employee, a caseworker, someone with a badge and a lanyard and a purchasing department phone who was not there in any capacity that served the Quinn children. Could be someone who worked or had worked within the system that Aiken had spent 11 years managing. Declan went back inside. He looked at Naomi. "The federal contact," he said. "I need to make that call." "Who is it?" she said. "Her name is Patricia Wren," he said. "She's an assistant special agent in charge at the FBI's Cleveland field office. I crossed paths with her 4 years ago on something I'm not going to explain right now. She gave me a direct number. She said to use it if I ever had something that couldn't go through local channels." He paused. "I have never used it." Naomi looked at him for a moment. Something in her expression shifted. Not relief, not yet, but the recalibration of someone who had been calculating the odds and had just watched one of the variables change. "Call her," Naomi said. He called her. The phone rang 8 times. He was on the edge of voicemail when it connected, and a woman's voice said, flat and unhurried, "Wren." "My name is Declan Rourke," he said. "You gave me this number 4 years ago." A short pause. "I remember you," she said. "You pulled a woman out of a trafficking situation in Lorain County and then refused to testify because you said the defense attorney would use your club affiliation to dismantle the prosecution." "The DA agreed with me," he said. The conviction held. "I know," she said. "Why are you calling?" He told her. He told her everything. Pruitt, Clearpath, Aiken, Hale, Brightfield, the network of shell entities, the 7 children, the photograph, the institutional device. He told her in the same flat, efficient sequence that Naomi had used that morning, because that was the language this required. Not urgency, not emotion, just the architecture of what they had and what it pointed toward. When he finished, there was a silence of approximately 30 seconds. "You have documentation," she said. "We have financial records, custody agreements, entity registration traces, a school's documented observation file, and a forensic digital trail on at least one confirmed financial transfer connecting Hale's LLC to a receiving party in Cuyahoga County. That's not enough for a federal warrant by itself," she said, "but it's enough to open a parallel track." A pause. "I need to make 2 calls. Don't approach Pruitt. Don't approach anyone connected to Aiken. And do not let your documentation leave a single controlled location until I call you back." "How long?" he said. 2 hours, she said. "Maybe 3. "The Guardian returns in approximately 36 hours, he said. "Possibly less. And there's a child in Kettering with a transfer date in 4 days that we cannot allow to proceed." "I understand the timeline," she said. Her voice was not unkind. It was the voice of someone for whom urgency was a daily operating condition. 2 hours. She hung up. Declan stood in the garage with the phone in his hand and the rain on the roof and the stripped Harley on its jack stands, and thought about 2 hours. He thought about what could move in 2 hours, in either direction. He called Mason in. Mason came through the door and looked at him. "Federal?" he said. "Yes." Mason nodded once. Not surprised, not relieved, just integrating. "The photograph," Declan said. "Whoever sent it knows Naomi is connected to us, which means the apartment may not be secure." "I'll move the kids," Mason said immediately. "Where?" "My place," Mason said. "Off Route 9. Nobody connects it to the club." He paused. "Petra can stay with them. I'll stay." "I need you here." "Then Holt stays." "Holt and Carter," Declan said. "Carter needs something to do that isn't punching someone." Mason almost smiled. Almost. "All right." He turned to go. He stopped. He turned back. "The woman in that photograph. Ember." He said it carefully, the way he said things that mattered to him. "She's going to know something changed when we move them." "I know." "You going to tell her why?" Declan thought about 13 years old and a folder of school records and the particular economy of a girl who had already been lied to by enough adults that she could tell the difference between honesty and management. "Yes," he said. Mason left. Declan went to find Naomi. She was in the lot, standing in the rain without seeming to notice it, her phone to her ear and her eyes on the middle distance. She had her free hand pressed flat against her sternum in the unconscious way she did when she was managing something difficult without letting it out. She finished the call and looked at Declan. "Lyle found something," she said. "Driving the perimeter." A pause. "There's a car parked on the street behind the Sycamore Arms. It's been there since at least 5 this morning. The registration comes back to a leasing company in Columbus." "Corporate lease." "Yes." They looked at each other in the rain. "They're not just watching," Declan said. "No," Naomi said. "I don't think they are." He thought about the picture again. The way it had been sent. No message, just the image, just the confirmation of observation. Not a warning to back off. Not a threat designed to stop them. Something else. Something that felt more like an inventory, like someone taking stock of the pieces on the board before deciding how to move. His phone buzzed. Text from Lyle. Car moved, heading toward Sycamore. 2 occupants. And then 15 seconds later, a call from Holt. Declan picked up. "Someone just knocked on the apartment door," Holt said. His voice was very quiet. In the background, Declan could hear the specific silence of a room full of people who had gone still. "They said they're from County Child Services. They have paperwork." A pause. "Declan, Cody's standing in the kitchen doorway and he's looking at me like he already knows what this is." Declan was moving before Holt finished the sentence. Across the lot, toward his bike, rain hitting his face. "Don't open that door," he said. "I'm not opening it," Holt said. "Keep them talking. 2 minutes." He was on the bike. He kicked it. The engine fired, and the sound came up into his chest, and he pulled out of the lot onto Callaway Road and opened the throttle. 2 minutes, Holt." "Copy," Holt said. In the background, very faintly, Declan heard Ember's voice through the phone. Not her words. Just her voice. Taut, controlled, asking Holt something. And Holt's voice answering her in the low, steady tone he used when he needed someone to trust him. Declan pushed the bike harder. The rain came at him horizontal, and the road was slick, and the November cold was in his teeth, and he didn't slow down. Behind him, he heard another engine fire up. Mason, on his own bike, following without being told. They hit Birch Street at 55 miles an hour, and Declan felt, in the specific clarity of speed and cold and purpose, the thing that had been building since Ember ran through his garage door with frost on her lips and terror in her eyes. This was not going to end with paperwork. Whoever was at that door with county paperwork, and a corporate lease, and an institutional device, and a photograph sent at 4 in the morning was part of something that had been running for 11 years. Through the machinery of the system meant to protect children, and they had just made the mistake of showing up at a door where the people on the other side of it were not going to open it. He was 2 blocks from the Sycamore Arms when Holt called back. "They left," Holt said. Declan eased off the throttle. "They heard the bike," Holt said. "Or they saw you coming. They said they'd be back with a court order." A court order. The specific language of people who had access to the system and knew how to use it. The language of someone who understood that the law was a tool and had spent years calibrating exactly how to use that tool to make certain children disappear into the spaces between its teeth. He pulled into the Sycamore Arms lot. He killed the engine. Rain came down in the silence. Mason pulled in beside him 30 seconds later. They sat on their bikes in the rain and looked at the building. "How long to get a court order?" Mason said. "In a county where you know the judge?" Declan said. 2 hours, maybe less. 2 hours. The same 2 hours Patricia Wren needed to make her calls. He got off the bike. He walked toward the building. He thought about the clock that had just started running. The specific double clock of federal process moving in one direction and a court order manufactured by people who knew the system's shortcuts moving in the other. He thought about Cody, standing in the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed. He thought about what it had cost an 11-year-old boy to stay standing in that doorway. He went inside. Ember was in the hallway outside the apartment. Not inside, not hidden. In the hallway, standing with her back against the wall beside the door, arms wrapped around herself, looking at the stairwell. When she heard his boots on the floor, she turned her head. She looked at him with the flat, direct gaze that he had come to understand was not coldness, but clarity. The look of a person who needed the truth because they had been damaged by the lack of it. "They're coming back," she said. "Yes," he said, "with a court order." "Probably." She looked at the stairwell for a moment. Then she looked back at him. Her voice was very steady and very quiet, and under the steadiness was something that had been compressed for a very long time. "If they get us with a court order," she said, "can you stop them?" He looked at her. He thought about 2 hours. He thought about Wren and Renner and Theo's financial traces and the photograph in the car on the street behind the building. He thought about Indianapolis. He thought about the gavel and the ruling and the 8 months that followed. He thought about what it meant to tell a 13-year-old girl the truth. "Not legally," he said. "Not yet." Her jaw moved. "But I'm not going to let them take you," he said, "whatever it costs." She looked at him for a long time. The hallway was cold and dim, and the carpet smelled like mildew, and somewhere downstairs a door opened and closed. "Okay," she said finally, not with relief, with the specific gravity of someone who has decided to believe one thing in the absence of every other option. She pushed off the wall. She went back into the apartment. Declan stood in the hallway. He pulled out his phone. He looked at the time. He thought about a court order in 2 hours and an 11-year-old boy in a kitchen doorway and a federal agent somewhere in Cleveland making calls. He thought about the shape of what they had missed, the 11 years of it, the architecture of it, the way it had been built to look exactly like the system that was supposed to stop it, so that the people who were supposed to see it couldn't see it until they were already inside it. He thought about the photograph on Naomi's phone, his own face in grainy morning light, walking toward a school with a girl who had learned to lie to protect her brothers and had told him so without apology, because honesty was the only currency she had left that nobody had taken from her yet. His phone rang. "Wren." He answered it. "I made my calls," she said. Her voice was different now. Not colder, but more compressed, carrying more weight per word. "Rourke, I need you to listen carefully." A pause. "Gerald Aiken is not retired." Declan's hand tightened on the phone. "His retirement was a reassignment," Wren said. 18 months ago he was moved, quietly, internally, above the county level, to a position with a state interagency task force on child placement oversight. Another pause. "A task force whose mandate includes coordinating between county child welfare divisions and family court systems across 12 counties. 12 counties. Not a contractor running a local operation. A man who had moved himself, or been moved, into a position with systemic access to 12 counties worth of child welfare infrastructure, family courts, placement records, and the machinery that moved children through the system." "He's not above Pruitt," Declan said. The words came out flat and final because there was no other way to say them. "He is the system." "In those 12 counties," Wren said. "Yes. Effectively, for the last 18 months. A pause. "I'm opening a formal investigation. But Rourke," her voice shifted, and what was underneath it now was not bureaucratic precision, but the voice of someone saying something they needed a person to actually hear. "The task force has access to family court emergency order processing. If Aiken knows you're onto this, he can generate a court removal order for those children through the task force's expedited channel in under an hour. It will look completely legitimate. It will have a judge's signature, and the children will be transferred before any federal intervention can intercept. Under an hour." The two people with the institutional device and the corporate lease who had knocked on the door and said they were from County Child Services, who had left when they heard the bike, who had said they'd be back with a court order. Under an hour. "How long until your investigation creates a legal instrument I can use to block that order?" Declan said. The pause was not long. It didn't need to be. "Longer than an hour," Wren said. He hung up. He stood in the hallway of the Sycamore Arms with the phone in his hand and the mildew smell and the distant sound of the children inside the apartment, and understood with complete and total clarity that the legal process was not going to save those kids in the next 60 minutes. The legal process was exactly what was going to be used to take them. Declan understood this in the hallway with complete physical clarity, not as an abstraction, not as a strategic problem, but as something with weight and temperature, something that pressed against his sternum and stayed there. He had spent 6 years since Indianapolis believing that the right answer was to build cases correctly, to hand things to the right people through the right channels, to be the man who did not make himself the story. He had built that belief on the wreckage of one failure, and he had carried it like a corrective, like penance, like the one lesson that cost enough to actually stick. The right channels were Gerald Aiken's channels. The right people worked in Gerald Aiken's system. He put the phone in his pocket. He went into the apartment. The room registered his face before he said anything. Holt read it first. Holt had been reading rooms for 30 years, and he looked at Declan's expression and straightened up from the wall where he'd been leaning and said nothing, just straightened. Carter Briggs, who was standing near the window, turned around. Petra, who was in the kitchen, stopped moving. The children were in the living room. Leo was on the couch with a blanket. Marcus was on the floor. Cody was in the kitchen doorway. Ember was standing in the middle of the living room looking at Declan. "We're moving," he said. Quiet. Clear. No performance in it. "Right now. Take what matters and leave everything else." Ember did not ask why. She turned around and started moving. That was the thing about her. She had been in survival mode long enough that she didn't waste time on questions that would be answered by events. She went to the bedroom and came back in 45 seconds with the manila envelope and 2 backpacks and a coat for each of her brothers. She got Leo up off the couch with one hand, got his coat on him, looked at Marcus, who was already on his feet. She looked at Cody. Cody was looking at Declan. "Pruitt's people?" he said. "Not Pruitt," Declan said. "Someone above Pruitt. They're going to try to use a court order to move you. We're not going to let that happen, but I need you out of this building before the paperwork arrives." Cody processed this in the way he processed everything, without visible reaction, through the specific stillness of a child who had learned that reaction cost more than it produced. Then he uncrossed his arms and went to get his jacket. They were out of the apartment in 4 minutes. Mason had the truck running in the lot. Holt took the 3 boys in Mason's truck. Carter took Ember in his car, a nondescript 4-door that was not connected to the club by registration, with Petra beside her. Declan and Mason took the bikes, flanking, staying visible, because visible was a deterrent, and right now deterrence was buying them the minutes they needed. They rolled out of the Sycamore Arms lot at 10:47 in the morning. At 10:52, Lyle called. "2 cars just turned onto Birch Street," he said. He was on foot somewhere near the building, which was how he'd been operating since 5. On foot? On the perimeter, invisible in the way that lean men in ordinary coats could be invisible on a city street when they moved like they belonged there. "One is the corporate lease from before. The other is a county vehicle. I can see paperwork through the windshield of the county car. Looks official." "Let them find an empty apartment," Declan said. "Oh, they're going to hate that," Lyle said. Something in his voice was not quite satisfaction. It was the particular dry quality of a man who had waited a long time for something to move in the right direction. He hung up. Declan rode with the cold in his face and the engine under him and thought about the next 45 minutes. Mason's place was 12 minutes out on Route 9, a single-story house on a half-acre lot behind a stand of beaches. No neighbors close enough to matter. Petra would stay with the kids. Holt and Carter would stay. 4 people in a house, nobody associated with the Iron Shepherds, off a road that didn't see much traffic for as long as it took. As long as it took had to be measured in hours, not days. Because Wren was moving at federal speed, which was the correct speed and also not fast enough. Because Aiken had just tried to execute a removal order and found the apartment empty, and an empty apartment was not a stopped plan, it was a delayed one. Because Pruitt was still coming back, and whatever timeline Pruitt was operating on had just been accelerated by the fact that someone in his network had tried to move and failed. And because Daniel Marsh in Kettering, 14 miles away, had 4 days on a transfer agreement to a non-existent organization. Declan pulled into Mason's lot behind the truck. He killed the engine. He sat for a moment with the ticking, cooling metal between his legs and the beech trees moving in the wet November wind and thought about what the next move had to be. Not Pruitt yet. Not until Wren had her instrument. But Aiken. Aiken was the piece that changed everything, and he was also the piece they couldn't touch without the federal process. and the federal process was running at its own speed while children existed in the gap between what was legal and what was safe. He got off the bike. He went inside. But the house smelled like motor oil and old wood, which was Mason's particular domestic signature. The kitchen table became an operations table inside 10 minutes. Naomi's laptop, Theo's laptop, the Quinn documents spread across one end, 2 phones charging on the counter. Petra settled the children in the back of the house, a bedroom and a small sitting room that had a television and a couch and a door with a lock on it that she turned without ceremony. Leo went without argument. Marcus followed. Cody stood in the doorway of the sitting room and looked at Declan once before he went in, and the look was the same as it had been in the apartment kitchen, an 11-year-old boy doing the calculation of whether the floor was going to hold. Declan held his gaze for a moment. He nodded once. Cody went in. Petra closed the door. In the kitchen, the work resumed. Theo had been running since the garage. He had the quality of a man operating on the edge of his capacity. Not fraying, but burning very clean. The way certain kinds of people burned when the thing they were doing mattered enough. He had 3 browser tabs and 2 terminal windows and a legal pad covered in connection diagrams that looked, from across the table, like something between circuit schematics and a map. Aiken's task force, he said, not looking up. I've been into the public filings. The task force has 12 member counties and a state-level coordination mandate, but the actual operational authority is concentrated in a 3-person steering committee. He paused, made a notation. Aiken chairs the committee. The other 2 members are a family court administrator named Phyllis Brandt and a county services director named Warren Coles. He looked up. Brandt signed the notarization on 2 of Pruitt's custody agreements. The room absorbed this. She's not a notary, Naomi said. No, Theo said. She used the family court seal, which is not the same thing as a notarization, but would look the same to anyone who wasn't specifically examining the document type. It's a forgery, Naomi said. It's a forgery made with an authentic institutional seal by someone who had authorized access to that seal, Theo said, which is legally a more complicated problem than a simple forgery. He paused. But it is still a crime. Naomi was typing. I'm sending this to Wren now. What about Coles? Declan said. Working, Theo said. He went back to his screens. Declan looked at Mason, who was standing against the wall by the back door in a posture of absolute stillness. Mason looked back. There was something they both understood without saying. The shape of the situation had changed in the last hour in ways that made it larger and more dangerous, and also possibly more resolvable, because larger things left larger traces, and larger traces were what federal investigations needed to move at speed. The question was whether speed was going to be fast enough. His phone buzzed. Renner. He stepped out the back door into the yard, into the wet and the cold and the sound of the beaches moving. He answered. They found the empty apartment, Renner said. She sounded like someone who had been on the phone for 3 hours without stopping. The county vehicle. I ran the driver. His name is Dale Marsh. He's a placement coordinator with the State Interagency Task Force. A pause. Not related to Daniel Marsh, just the same last name. Another pause. He's carrying paperwork signed by a family court administrator named Phyllis Brandt. Theo already has Brandt, Declan said. Forged seal on Pruitt's custody agreements. I need that documentation, Renner said immediately. Naomi's sending it to Wren right now. Declan, her voice shifted. The controlled, professional quality compressed tighter. The removal order they were trying to execute. I got a look at it through a contact at the family court. It's not a standard removal order. It's an emergency protective transfer. A pause. Which is a different instrument. It doesn't require a full hearing. It requires a signature from a task force steering committee chair and a family court liaison. Aiken, Declan said. Aiken signed it, she said. This morning, time-stamped 8:14. A pause. It names all 4 Quinn children by name. It lists the receiving placement as an organization called Brightfield Family Placement, Declan said. A silence. How did you know that? She said. Because Brightfield is the same fake organization that's on the transfer agreement for Daniel Marsh and Kettering, Declan said. Theo found it last night. Another silence, longer. He could hear Renner breathing. He could hear the specific quality of a detective's mind running at speed through the implications. If Brightfield is on both documents, she said slowly, then Aiken isn't just signing off on individual transfers. He's actively routing children to the same destination. To a destination that doesn't exist, Declan said, on paper. Which means the children don't go to Brightfield, she said. They go somewhere Brightfield is cover for. A pause. Rourke. How many children? He thought about Theo's connection diagram on the legal pad. He thought about 12 counties and an 18-month task force chairmanship, and 11 years before that of managing which reports went forward and which ones disappeared. I don't know yet, he said, but I don't think we're counting in single digits. The yard was cold. The beaches moved. A crow landed on the fence at the edge of the property, looked at him with the flat, incurious gaze of a crow, and flew off. I need 2 more hours, Renner said. I know, he said. I'll call you. He went back inside. Awesome. At 12:30, Ember knocked on the kitchen doorway. Everyone looked up. She was standing at the edge of the room with her arms at her sides. Not crossed, not defensive, just at her sides, which was a different posture than he'd seen from her before. More open, more deliberate, like she had decided to present herself as someone who was going to ask something directly and was going to stand in the asking without armor. What's happening? She said. Not a question with a rising inflection, a statement shaped like a question, the kind of sentence that meant, I'm not asking for permission to know. I'm notifying you that I'm going to. Declan looked at Naomi. Naomi looked at him. They had a half-second conversation with their eyes that covered the relevant ground. How much? How direct? What did she need versus what would she break under? And came out the other side of it with the same answer, which was that she was 13 and had been managing survival for multiple people for a long time, and she deserved the honest shape of what was happening. Come in, Declan said. She came in. She didn't sit. She stood on the other side of the table and looked at the laptops and the documents and the connection diagram on Theo's legal pad and then looked at Declan. He told her. Not everything. Not the full scale of what Aiken might represent, not the numbers that Theo was still running, but the essential shape. That Pruitt worked for people above him, that those people had access to the courts and the placement system, that they had tried to use that access this morning and he had gotten her and her brothers out before they could, that federal law enforcement was now involved and building the legal instrument needed to stop the court order. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Daniel Marsh, she said. He looked at her. You mentioned his name, she said. On the phone in the hallway. You didn't know I was there. She paused. He goes to Kettering Elementary. I know him. We rode the same bus for a while last year before they changed my route. A pause. His parents died in March. The kitchen was very quiet. Is he safe right now? She said. Right now, yes, Declan said. We have people who know about the transfer agreement. We're trying to stop it. 4 days, she said. Yes. So you need to finish this in the time you have before Pruitt comes back, she said. Because once Pruitt is back, they can move faster. They already tried to move fast today. Yes, he said. She looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked up. The manila envelope, she said. The one from the apartment. There's something in it I didn't show Naomi because I didn't know what it was. Naomi went very still. Ember reached into the backpack she was wearing and took out the envelope and set it on the table. She opened it and took out a folded piece of paper from the very back of the envelope, tucked into the inside flap, which was why Naomi had missed it. She unfolded it and set it on the table. It was a handwritten note. The handwriting was uncertain, slightly shaky. The handwriting of someone who was scared or old or both. It said, If something happens to me, these are the people I called. I'm sorry. I didn't know what he was going to do with them. Below that, a first name and a phone number. Below that, 2 words. Sandra Marsh. The room registered this in waves. Naomi first. Her head came up and her eyes went to the paper and then to Ember. Then Theo, who had been half listening while he worked and now stopped working entirely. Then Mason, slowly, from his position by the wall. Sandra Marsh. The aunt in Kettering who had signed a voluntary relinquishment of guardianship for Daniel Marsh 4 weeks ago. Her note was in the Quinn children's documents. "Where did this come from?" Naomi said. Quiet, controlled. "It was in the envelope when we got it," Ember said. "It was always in the envelope. Pruitt gave us the envelope when we first moved in. He said it was our documents. We had to keep it safe. I never opened it until the night I came to the garage." She paused. "I found the note that night. I didn't know what it meant." She looked at Declan. "Does it help?" Declan looked at the note. He looked at the phone number. Sandra Marsh had the Quinn children's contact information. Sandra Marsh had written a note apologizing for not knowing what he was going to do with them. Sandra Marsh had voluntarily relinquished guardianship of her nephew, and Sandra Marsh had apparently tried to call someone before she did. She tried to back out, Naomi said, or she tried to warn someone, and Pruitt, or Aiken, or whoever, moved her through the relinquishment before she could. "Can we reach her?" Declan said. "That phone number," Naomi said. She was already picking up her phone. "If it's still active, try," Declan said. Naomi dialed. She put it on speaker. It rang 3 times. A woman answered. Her voice was the voice of someone who had been waiting for a call they were afraid of, and answered it anyway. "Yes?" she said. "Mrs. Marsh," Naomi said. "My name is Naomi Cross. I'm calling about Daniel." A silence. Then, very quietly, "Is he safe?" "He's safe right now," Naomi said. "Mrs. Marsh, I need to ask you about what you signed 4 weeks ago. I need you to tell me what happened." The silence lasted long enough that Declan thought she might hang up. Then she started talking. She talked for 7 minutes. She talked in the voice of someone who had been holding something alone for a long time and had reached the point where the holding cost more than the telling. She talked about how Pruitt had come to her 3 months after Daniel's parents died, presenting himself as a representative of a state placement support service. She talked about how he had explained very carefully, very sympathetically, that the state system was overwhelmed and that children of Daniel's age who were not placed through official channels often spent years in temporary situations, and that he had access to a private placement service that could match Daniel with a permanent family quickly. She talked about the paperwork he had brought. Official-looking, stamped, carefully explained. She talked about the $15,000. She stopped. "He paid you," Naomi said carefully. "He said it was a support grant," she said, "from a private child welfare foundation. He said it was standard for families in my situation." Her voice was very thin now. "I took it, I signed, and then—" A long pause. "A week later, I found something online, an article about a man in Pennsylvania who had done the same thing, presented himself as a placement facilitator. The children he placed—" She stopped. "I called Pruitt. He didn't answer. I called the number on the paperwork and it was disconnected. I went to the county office and they said they had no record of Raymond Pruitt as a licensed placement facilitator." Another pause. "I didn't know who to call. I put that note in the envelope because a woman at the county office told me the Quinn children were with Pruitt too. She said it quietly, like she didn't want anyone to hear her. I don't know her name." "Mrs. Marsh," Naomi said, "I need to ask you to do something difficult. I need you to talk to a federal agent today, as soon as possible." A pause. "Will it help Daniel?" she said. "Yes," Naomi said. "I believe it will." Another pause. "All right," she said. "I'll talk to whoever you need me to talk to." Naomi looked at Declan. He was already on his phone, calling Wren. Wren picked up on the second ring. "I have a witness," Declan said. "Direct victim of Pruitt. She signed a guardianship relinquishment under false pretenses. She received payment framed as a support grant. She can place Pruitt at the point of transaction." He paused. "Her name is Sandra Marsh. She's in Kettering." A silence on Wren's end. A working silence. "Send me her number," Wren said. "Right now." He sent it. "Rourke," Wren said, "I've been on the phone with my ASAC for the last 2 hours. We have enough to open formally. The Brandt seal forgery, plus the Marsh witness statement, plus the financial traces Theo Park sent. It's enough for a federal complaint." A pause. "But I need you to understand what that means for your timeline. A federal opening moves at federal speed. The warrant process—" How long? He said. She was quiet for a moment. If everything aligns, she said. 6 to 8 hours, minimum. 6 to 8 hours. Pruitt was returning in approximately 20 hours, maybe less. Aiken had already tried to execute a removal order this morning and would try again. Daniel Marsh had 4 days. 6 to 8 hours was theoretically fine. Theoretically. What could make it not align, he said. If Aiken has contacts at the federal level, she said, which, given the scope of what you've described, is not impossible. A pause. I'm running this through a channel that bypasses any state-level coordination. I've been careful, but I want you to be realistic about the possibility that we are not the only people who know this investigation has opened. He was quiet for a moment. I understand, he said. He hung up. He stood in Mason's kitchen with the rain coming down outside and the beaches moving and the sound of the children in the back room. Leo's voice, asking Petra something, the small, ordinary sound of a 7-year-old asking a question. And he thought about 6 to 8 hours and Aiken and what it meant to run a network for 11 years through the official system. It meant contacts. It meant redundancy. It meant fallback positions and alternate routes, and the specific resilience of something that had survived for 11 years by being embedded in the infrastructure of the thing that was supposed to stop it. Theo, he said. Theo looked up. Can Aiken know the federal investigation has opened? He said. How fast could that information reach him? Theo thought. Depends on how deep his institutional network goes. If he has contacts at the U.S. Attorney's Office or inside the FBI's regional administrative structure. Not operational, just administrative, someone who processes paperwork. He could have a flag on certain query types that would alert him. A pause. Could be minutes, could be hours. What does he do when he finds out? Declan said. He accelerates, Mason said from the wall. Everyone looked at him. He accelerates, Mason said again, simply, as if he was stating a law of physics. He tries to move the product before the doors close. He paused. He doesn't run. Men like him don't run. They tighten the system, they move everything they can move, and they dare you to stop them while they're doing it. He looked at Declan. He's going to try to move the Quinn kids today. The room absorbed this. Not tomorrow, Declan said. Today, Mason said. Declan looked at Naomi. She was looking at Mason with the expression of someone who had just heard a thing they already suspected, confirmed by someone they trusted. Pruitt doesn't need to be back, Naomi said quietly. Pruitt initiates the paperwork. The transfer order is already signed by Aiken. The removal order is already executed. All they need is someone to show up and physically take those children. And they know where we are, Carter said from the corner. Everyone turned to look at him. He'd been quiet since they left the Sycamore Arms, a coiled quality to his silence that was different from the coiled quality he usually carried. They had someone watching the apartment. If they followed us, Lyle checked for a tail, Holt said. Lyle's one person, Carter said. If they had 2 cars running relay... He stopped. He looked at Declan. His jaw was tight. His hands were tight. We should move again. We can't keep moving, Declan said. Then we stand here, Carter said, which means when they come to this address. The room was quiet. He was right. He was 22 years old and angry and had been sitting on it for 4 days, and he was right. Declan looked at Mason. Mason looked at the back door. Call the others, Declan said. All of them? Mason said. Everyone who's available, Declan said. Everyone who can be here in 45 minutes. Mason pulled out his phone. Declan went to the back room and knocked, and Petra opened the door. She looked at his face and stepped aside without being asked. The 3 boys were on the couch. The television was on, but nobody was watching it. Cody was looking at the wall. Marcus was looking at the floor. Leo was asleep against Cody's shoulder, small and trusting, his face slack and peaceful in a way that made everything else in the room feel very loud. Ember was in the chair in the corner. She looked at Declan when he came in. How long do we have? She said. The question stripped everything down to the thing that was actually being asked. Not reassurance, not comfort. How long? I don't know, he said. Not long enough to wait. She nodded. She looked at her brothers. She looked back at him. What do you need us to do? She said. Stay in this room, he said. Stay together. Don't come out unless I come for you personally. He paused. If anyone else comes through that door, anyone, Cody, you take your brothers to the window. You understand? Cody had woken up without moving. His eyes were open and he was listening. Window, Cody said. Drop to the garden. Run left along the fence. There's a neighbor's shed at the end of the lot, the red one. Get inside and stay there and don't move until you hear my voice. Cody nodded. Declan looked at Ember. You too, he said. I'll get them out, she said. Not, I'll try. I'll get them out. He held her gaze for a moment. He thought about what she'd carried for however long she'd been carrying it, and the specific kind of strength that wasn't the absence of fear, but something that had been built in the presence of it, slowly, under pressure, without anyone watching and without anyone helping. I know, he said. He went back to the kitchen. Voss had arrived while Declan was in the back room. He was standing at the table looking at Theo's connection diagram on the legal pad. He looked up when Declan came in, and his face had the quality it got when he had already processed the situation and moved past reaction into the operational space on the other side. How many do you think they'll send? Voss said. Enough to look official, Declan said. County vehicles, paperwork. Maybe local PD if Aiken can requisition a patrol. So we can't escalate physically, Voss said. No, Declan said. Not unless they move first. And if they have a court order? The court order is fraudulent, Declan said. Federal investigation is open. Wren is 6 to 8 hours from a warrant. 6 to 8 hours, Voss said. He looked at Declan steadily. We stand in the driveway and we hold them here for 6 to 8 hours. Yes, Declan said. The words sat between them. Voss looked at the table. He looked at the connection diagram. He looked at the connection diagram. He looked at the documents. All right, Isam, he said. The sound of bikes started arriving outside, one at a time, then two together, then a pause, then three more. Declan went to the front window and looked out at Mason's driveway, and the road beyond it. 5 bikes in the driveway. Lyle coming up the road on foot, having left his bike somewhere that wasn't Mason's address. Theo at the table. Naomi at the table. Mason by the back door. Voss in the middle of the room. Carter by the front window on the other side. 7 riders. 2 operational. 1 in the back with the children. Declan looked at the clock on the microwave. 1:48 in the afternoon. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered it. A man's voice. Calm. Administrative. The voice of someone who had learned to weaponize reasonableness. Mr. Rourke, the voice said. My name is Gerald Aiken. I think it's time we talked. The kitchen went very still. Everyone who could see his face was looking at it. He kept his face even. I know who you are, Declan said. Then you know that the situation you're currently managing has some complexity that I'd like to help clarify, Aiken said. His voice was the voice of a bureaucrat at the end of a long career. Patient, practiced, faintly avuncular. The children in your care are the subject of a legitimate emergency protective transfer order. I understand you have concerns about the process. I'd like to address those concerns directly. You'd like to address them, Declan said. I'd like to resolve this without anyone making choices they regret, Aiken said. The avuncular quality was still there, but underneath it was something else. The specific hardness of someone who had been doing this for 11 years and had absorbed every obstacle he'd encountered and kept moving. You've gotten some information about our operation that I believe you've mischaracterized in good faith as something it isn't. I'd like to explain what it actually is. How did you get this number? Declan said. You called an FBI agent this morning, Aiken said. Administrative systems log those contacts. I have colleagues in administrative functions who flag certain query types. A pause. I know you spoke to Patricia Wren. I know what you provided her. I know the investigation is opening. Another pause. The avuncular quality had dropped now, just slightly, like a temperature dropping 1 degree. I want you to think very carefully about what happens to those children if this situation becomes a protracted legal process. These things take time, months, sometimes years. During that time, 4 children will be in temporary placement in a system that is, as I think you know, significantly overburdened. Declan looked at the table. Or, Aiken said, they can be placed today, in a good home, through our process, and have stability. Through your process, Declan said. Through our process, Aiken said, which provides outcomes that the official system can't match. And Daniel Marsh, Declan said. A pause. The first pause that had any irregularity in it. Daniel Marsh is a separate situation, Aiken said. Not relevant here. You put him on the same transfer document as a fake organization, Declan said. He's very relevant here. The pause this time was longer. When Aiken spoke again, the avuncular quality was gone entirely, and what was left was the voice that had been under it, flat, careful, and very cold. I'm going to ask you once, Aiken said, to consider what you're actually able to do here. You're a man with a criminal record connected to an outlaw motorcycle club, in possession of children who are legally subject to an active transfer order signed by a licensed state official. If you refuse to comply with that order, you are in violation of a court instrument. The police who respond to that violation will not be making distinctions about your intentions. A pause. I've dealt with people who thought they were protecting children before. Mostly what they did was complicate things. Declan's hand was tight on the phone. He kept his voice even. Then let's talk about what I can do, he said. I can stand in this driveway for 6 hours. I can make sure that every vehicle that comes here is documented, photographed, and time-stamped. I can make sure that every piece of paper anyone hands me goes directly to Patricia Wren within minutes. I can make sure that the witness statement from Sandra Marsh is on record with the FBI before any county vehicle turns onto this road. Then he paused. Or we can end this right now. You walk away from the Quinn children, you walk away from Daniel Marsh, and you call Raymond Pruitt and tell him his operation is done. The silence was very long. You don't understand the scope of this, Aiken said. Quiet now. Very quiet. You're holding a thread. I am the loom. Pull it, Declan said. He hung up. The kitchen was absolutely still. Then Voss said, He's moving now. Yes, Declan said. How long? Declan thought about administrative systems and county vehicles, and a man who had survived 11 years by knowing exactly how fast the machinery could move when he told it to. 30 minutes, he said. Maybe less. Voss looked at the other men. He looked at the window. Outside, he said. Simple. Final. They moved. By 2:17, 6 bikes were parked in a line across Mason's driveway, not blocking the road, not aggressive, just presentes. The specific, unmistakable presence of men who had decided where they were standing and had no immediate plans to stand anywhere else. The rain had eased to a mist. The beech trees dripped. The road beyond the driveway was empty and gray and straight. Declan stood at the center of the line with his arms at his sides. He thought about Aiken's voice. You're holding a thread. I am the loom. He thought about a girl running 11 blocks through November cold to a garage full of strangers because there was no one else left to run to. He thought about what it meant to be the kind of man who did the right thing at the wrong time and got a child hurt. He thought about what it meant to be the kind of man who waited long enough and built the thing correctly and handed it to the people who were supposed to use it and watched them use it wrong. He thought about standing in a driveway. He thought about the fact that this was, in the end, the only thing he had left to offer. Not a legal remedy, not a system, not a process. Just his body between those children and the thing coming for them. Just the line of men on either side of him who had each, for their own reasons, decided the same thing. The first county vehicle appeared at the end of the road at 2:23, then the second. Then, behind them, a third vehicle. Not a county car, not a corporate lease. A black SUV with no visible markings, moving slowly, the way vehicles moved when they were not in a hurry, because they didn't believe anyone was going to stop. The black SUV stopped at the end of the driveway. It did not pull forward. It did not retreat. It sat there with its engine running and its windows dark, and for approximately 30 seconds, nothing in the world moved except the mist coming off the beaches and the slow drip of water from the garage eave onto the gravel below. Declan counted the vehicles. 2 county cars. The SUV. The county cars had 2 occupants each. He could see them through the windshields, county badged, paper folders visible on the dashboards. Official, practiced. The specific body language of people who expected the paperwork to do the work for them. The SUV had no visible occupants through the tinted glass. He stood at the center of the driveway line, and he did not move. Behind him, the house was quiet. Petra had the children in the back room. Naomi was at the kitchen table with her laptop open and her phone on speaker to Ren's direct line, feeding real-time documentation of every vehicle, every plate, every timestamp. Theo was running trace on the SUV's plate from the moment Lyle had photographed it turning onto Mason's Road. Carter was inside at the front window. Declan had made that call before they came outside. Not because Carter was the least capable, but because Carter was the most likely to move first if things deteriorated. And someone needed to be inside with the children who could get them out the window and over the fence in under a minute if it came to that. The line of bikes across the driveway said everything that needed to be said. 6 machines, cold chrome catching the flat November light, and 6 men standing in front of them in silence. No weapons, no posturing, no raised voices. Just the specific, unmistakable gravity of men who had decided what they were doing and were not in a conversation about it. The driver's door of the lead county car opened. A man got out, 40s, county badge jacket, folder under his arm. He walked toward the driveway with the measured pace of someone performing a professional function and expecting professional compliance, and he stopped at the edge of the gravel where the concrete of the road met Mason's property and looked at the line of bikers and then looked at Declan specifically. "I have an emergency protective transfer order for 4 minor children currently in this residence," he said. "Signed by the chair of the State Interagency Child Placement Task Force." He held up the folder. "I need you to step aside." Declan looked at him. "What's your name?" he said. A pause. "Dale Marsh, Placement Coordinator, State Task Force." "Mr. Marsh," Declan said, "the organization named as receiving placement on that order does not exist. The address on the order is a vacant commercial property. The seal on the order was applied by a family court administrator who is currently the subject of a federal forgery investigation." He paused. "You can choose to know that or not know it, but I need you to understand that every word I just said is documented and in the hands of the FBI's Cleveland field office as of this morning." Dale Marsh's face did the thing that faces did when the ground shifted under them. A microsecond of recalibration, a tightening around the eyes that was not anger, but something more complicated. Something that looked briefly like a man who was starting to understand what he had been carrying. "That's not," he started. "Step back to your vehicle," Declan said. "Make a phone call. Verify what I just told you. We'll still be here." Dale Marsh looked at him for a long moment. He looked at the line of bikes. He looked at the folder in his hand. He took one step back. The SUV's door opened. The man who got out was 61 years old. Declan knew this because Naomi had found his photograph in the task force's public documentation, and his age was listed in the bio. He was medium height and gray-haired, wearing a long coat, and he moved with the particular ease of someone who had navigated institutions for decades and had learned that ease was its own form of authority. He walked toward the driveway without hurrying and stopped beside Dale Marsh and looked at Declan with eyes that were very still and very flat. "Mr. Rourke," Gerald Aiken said. His voice was the same as it had been on the phone. Measured, practiced. The voice that had sat across from Naomi Cross in an office and told her a report was in process while the report was disappearing. "Gerald Aiken," Declan said. Just the name. Nothing else. Something moved across Aiken's face. Not surprised, he'd known Declan knew who he was. Something more subtle. The specific response of a man who had spent 11 years being invisible inside the system and was now standing in a driveway with his name in another man's mouth, and understanding, possibly for the first time, what visible felt like. "This is not the situation you think it is," Aiken said. "You said that on the phone," Declan said. "My answer's the same." "You have a romanticized understanding of what you've uncovered." He said it without heat, like a professor correcting a student's thesis. "What we do provides outcomes that the official system cannot. Children who would spend years cycling through inadequate placements instead have stable, permanent arrangements. The families involved pay $15,000, Declan said. Are vetted, Aiken said. Are committed, are prepared. And the children, Declan said. Did anyone ask them? Aiken looked at him. The flat stillness of his eyes did not change. Children, he said carefully, are not in a position to make determinations about their long-term welfare. No, Declan said. But you are. And you did. He let that sit for a moment. For 11 years. A silence fell over the driveway. The mist moved through the beaches. Water dripped. Somewhere down the road a dog was barking at something. 2 sharp barks and then silence. Aiken looked at the line of men behind Declan. He looked at their faces. Voss, unreadable. Mason, very still. Lyle, who had come in from the road and was now standing at the end of the line, with his hands in his jacket pockets and his eyes on Aiken, with an expression that Declan could not see directly but could feel from 3 feet away. He looked at the bikes. He looked back at Declan. You can't hold this position indefinitely, Aiken said. No, Declan said, but I can hold it long enough. Aiken's phone rang. He looked at it. He looked at the screen for a moment, the specific look of a man whose internal model of the situation had just been contradicted by a piece of information, and he answered it and listened for approximately 20 seconds and then lowered the phone. He looked at Declan. Who is Patricia Wren? Dale Marsh said quietly, from behind Aiken. He was looking at his own phone. His face had the quality of a man who had been pulling a thread and was now holding more thread than he'd expected and was doing real-time math about what the rest of the spool looked like. Gerald, who is Patricia Wren, and why is the FBI— Put the phone away, Aiken said. There are federal holds on 3 LLCs connected to the task force's operating accounts, Marsh said. His voice had changed. The professional administrative quality had given way to something raw. Gerald, my name is on 2 of those accounts. Put the phone away, Aiken said. His voice had not changed. It was still flat, still practiced. It was the voice of a man who had absorbed problems for 11 years and was applying the same mechanism to this one and was, Declan thought, about 3 minutes from understanding that the mechanism wasn't going to work this time. Declan's phone buzzed. He looked at it. Text from Naomi. Wren has the warrant, federal. Just came through. She's mobilizing now, 20 minutes. He looked up. He looked at Aiken. 20 minutes, Declan said. Aiken looked at him. Federal warrant, Declan said. 20 minutes. The flat stillness of Aiken's eyes cracked. Not dramatically. Not the way things cracked in movies with visible collapse or sudden rage. Just a hairline fracture in the surface of it. A microsecond of something that was almost human looking out through the professional machinery at the driveway and the bikes and the line of men in the house beyond them. Then it closed again. Dale, Aiken said. His voice was very quiet. Marsh was looking at his phone. He didn't look up. Dale, Aiken said again. Marsh looked up. He looked at Aiken. He looked at the folder in his own hand, the transfer order, Aiken's signature, the forged Brandt seal. He looked at it for a long moment. He set it on the hood of the county car. He stepped back. Aiken stood very still for a moment. Then he turned and walked back to the SUV and got in, and the door closed, and the engine was already running, and the SUV began to back up slowly, deliberately, without hurrying. The last performance of a man who had practiced control for so long that he continued performing it even as everything around him stopped complying. Declan watched it go. He watched it reach the end of the road and pause at the intersection and then turn left toward the highway. He thought about the federal warrant and 20 minutes and Wren mobilizing and the specific inadequacy of 20 minutes in the face of what Aiken might do with the time. He picked up his phone and called Wren. The SUV, he said. Black plate number. He looked at Lyle, who held up his phone with the photograph, and read the plate. He just turned left onto Route 9 heading toward the highway. I have it, Wren said. She sounded like someone who had been in motion for 3 hours and had found another gear. We have a unit on Route 9. He's not going to make the highway. A pause. Rourke, stay where you are. Agents will be at your location in 15 minutes. He hung up. He stood in the driveway. Dale Marsh was still standing beside the county car. He had his hands at his sides, and his face was doing something difficult, working through something that had no clean resolution, the specific expression of a man who had believed he was doing one thing and had just been shown what thing he was actually doing. "I didn't know," Marsh said. It came out quiet, almost to himself. Declan looked at him. "I know," he said. "I've been with the task force for 8 months. Eichen told us the program. He said it was a supplemental placement service. He said it was approved. He said, Marsh stopped. He looked at the folder on the hood of the car. He looked away. "There are other coordinators in other counties. They don't know either." "You can tell that to the FBI," Declan said, "when they get here." Marsh nodded. He sat down on the bumper of the county car. He sat there with his hands between his knees and his head slightly bowed, the posture of a man who was going to be sitting with something for a long time. Declan turned around. He looked at the line of men behind him. Nobody said anything. Voss was looking at the road where the SUV had gone. Mason was looking at Declan with the flat, complete expression he got when something had been finished and he was taking stock of what it had cost. Lyle was looking at his phone, texting. Naomi, probably. Holt had his arms crossed and his head slightly down, breathing evenly, the posture of a man coming down from something without letting anyone see the coming down. Declan looked at all of them. He didn't say thank you, it wasn't that kind of thing. He just looked at them, each one, and they looked back, and that was sufficient. He went inside. The FBI arrived in 14 minutes. 2 vehicles, plane-wrapped, 4 agents plus Wren herself, who was 50-something and compact with short gray hair and eyes that processed rooms the way Theo processed data, fast, sequential, missing nothing. She shook Declan's hand in the driveway and held it half a second longer than a professional handshake required, which was as close as she was going to come to saying what the handshake was actually for. "Eichen's in custody," she said. "Route 9, 2 miles from the highway." He didn't resist. A pause. He asked for a lawyer before the cuffs were on. "What about Pruitt?" Declan said. "Warrant is in process," she said. "We'll have him before morning." "He was coming back tonight." "I know. We'll be waiting." She looked at him. "The other children, the 6 confirmed prior transfers. We're running every name through the placement records. It's going to take time, but we're going to find them." A pause. "Daniel Marsh has been flagged. He's not going anywhere." Declan nodded. She looked at the house. "The children here. What's the plan?" He thought about this. He had been thinking about it since the driveway, underneath the operational layer of the last 2 hours. What happened after the warrant? What happened after Eichen was in custody and Pruitt was arrested and the task force's operating accounts were frozen? What happened to 4 children who had no legal guardian, whose guardian's license was going to be revoked as part of a federal criminal complaint, who were currently in a house on Route 9 that was not registered as a foster placement? "There's a woman named Naomi Cross inside," he said. "She's a former licensed social worker. She knows the emergency placement process." He paused. "I'd like to talk to you about what the options are for keeping these children together." Wren looked at him steadily. "Talk to me," she said. They talked for 20 minutes, standing in the driveway while her agents went inside and took statements and documented everything Naomi and Theo had built over the last 48 hours. He told her about his wife. He told her about the house, which was on the other side of town, not the garage and not Mason's place, but a real house, with a yard and a spare room that had been a spare room for 6 years because some things didn't fill the way you expected them to. He told it plainly, without sentiment, in the same flat way he told everything that mattered. Wren listened. She didn't say yes, and she didn't say no. She said that emergency placement pending investigation was a documented process, and that with Naomi's background and the specific circumstances, it was not an unreasonable path to initiate tonight and explore properly in the morning. "Tonight," she said, "they need somewhere safe and stable. Can you provide that?" "Yes," he said. "Then let's start there," she said. He called Evelyn. She picked up on the second ring, and he told her what was happening. Not all of it, not the detail, but the shape of it. And she was quiet while he talked, And when he finished, she said, "How many?" "4," he said. "3 boys and a girl, ages 7, 9, 11, and 13. A pause. Not a hesitant pause. The pause of a woman running inventory. Rooms, beds, food, the particular domestic arithmetic of suddenly becoming responsible for additional humans. "Bring them," she said. She hung up. He stood with the phone in his hand for a moment. Then he went to find Ember. She was in the back sitting room with her brothers, the television still on but nobody watching it. Leo was awake now, sitting up, looking at the door when Declan opened it with the wide-eyed alertness of a child who had learned that doors opening could mean many things. Cody was standing, which meant he'd heard enough through the wall to know something had changed. Marcus was sitting on the floor with his knees pulled up, watching Declan's face. Ember was in the chair. She looked at him, and in the 3 seconds before he said anything, she read enough in his face to put her shoulders down. The specific slow release of tension that had been held so long it had become structural. "It's over," she said. "Most of it," he said. "Enough of it." She closed her eyes for a moment, just a moment. Then she opened them. "Aiken," she said. "In custody." "Pruitt?" "By morning." She nodded. She looked at her brothers. Leo had climbed off of the couch and was standing close to her, his hand finding her arm automatically, and she put her hand over his without looking down. "What happens now?" she said. He told her about Evelyn. He told her about the house. He told her it was not a permanent answer yet, and he was not going to pretend it was, because she was 13 and she had a calibrated detector for pretense, and it would have been an insult to use it on her now. He told her it was safe, and it was tonight, and they would figure out tomorrow in the morning. She looked at him. "Will we be together?" she said. "All 4 of us." "Yes," he said. She looked at Cody. Cody looked at Declan. The ancient 11-year-old calculation ran across his face and came out the other side somewhere he hadn't been before, somewhere that wasn't quite trust yet, but was the immediate precursor to it, the specific threshold that some people spent their whole lives standing at and never quite crossed. "Okay," Cody said. Leo pulled on Ember's sleeve. She looked down at him. "Is there food at the house?" he said. Something cracked open in Declan's chest, and he kept it off his face. "Yeah, bud," he said. "There's food." They left Mason's place at 4:40 in the afternoon. Holt drove the children in Mason's truck. Declan rode ahead. Mason rode behind. The 2 country miles between Route 9 and Evelyn's, their house, took 6 minutes, and Declan spent those 6 minutes in the cold air with the engine under him doing what he sometimes needed to do, which was let the road process things that didn't process any other way. He thought about Indianapolis. He thought about the case file and the gavel and the 8 months and the thing he had carried since then that he had misidentified for years as guilt. He understood now, riding in the late November cold with the fields going gray on either side, that it wasn't guilt. Guilt was what you carried for what you did. What he had been carrying was something more specific, the weight of what happens when you trust the mechanism instead of making the choice. He had made the choice this time. It had cost something. He didn't know yet what the bill was going to look like, legally, practically, in terms of whatever came next with the federal process and the placement paperwork and the 6 years of explanation. He was going to owe a lot of different official entities. It was going to be complicated and protracted, and there were going to be people along the way who were going to look at his jacket and his record and his club patch and tell him in professional language that he was not the right answer. He was going to disagree with them, persistently, for as long as it took. He pulled into the driveway and killed the engine. Evelyn was on the porch. She was 53, and she had the kind of face that had lived in it long enough to show the living. Laugh lines and worry lines, and the particular set of a woman who had spent years being a partner to a man who carried things and had learned to carry some of it with him without being asked and without making it about herself. She had a mug in her hands. She was wearing the green sweater she wore when she was trying to be ordinary. She looked at Holt's truck pulling in behind him. She looked at the windows. 4 faces looked back at her through the glass. She set the mug down on the porch railing. She came down the steps. She opened the truck door. Leo looked at her from the back seat with his wide, serious eyes. "Hi," Evelyn said. Just that. No performance in it, no forced warmth. Just the word, offered plainly, in the voice of a woman who had enough room. Leo looked at her for a moment. "Hi," he said. Evelyn stepped back and let them climb out. She looked at each of them in turn. Marcus, who looked at the yard first and then at her. Cody, who looked at her and then at Declan in the quick triangulating way he had. Ember, who came last, who looked at the house and then at Evelyn and held the look for a moment with those clear creek-water eyes. Evelyn looked back at her without flinching. "Are you hungry?" Evelyn said. Ember looked at her for another moment. "Yes," she said. Evelyn put her hand briefly on Ember's shoulder, not lingering, not making it a thing, just a hand on a shoulder for half a second, long enough to register and short enough not to ask anything of her. And then she turned and went back up the porch steps and held the door open. They went inside. Declan stood in the driveway until they were all through the door. Then he stood there a moment longer in the quiet. The cold was gentling toward evening, the kind of cold that lost its teeth as the day died. The fields behind the house were going the color of old iron. A few early stars were trying themselves out against the darkening sky. Mason pulled his bike up beside Declan's and killed the engine and sat for a moment. "You okay?" Mason said. Declan thought about it. "Yeah," he said. Mason looked at the house. Through the kitchen window they could see the light come on, warm, yellow, and the small movement of people. Evelyn at the stove, a child-shaped silhouette at the table. "Evelyn know what she's getting into?" Mason said. "She married me," Declan said. "She's got a high tolerance for complicated." Mason almost smiled. He swung off the bike. He stood beside Declan and looked at the lit kitchen window. "You should eat something," Mason said. "I know." "You haven't eaten since this morning." "I know." "I'm just saying." "I know, Mason." Mason went inside. Declan stayed in the driveway a minute longer. He looked at the sky. He thought about Naomi, who was still at Mason's house with 2 FBI agents going through every document and every digital trace with the focused intensity of someone who had waited 8 years for this specific work to exist. He thought about Theo, who had gone home to sleep for the first time in 36 hours and would be back at his computer by midnight. He thought about Voss and Holt and Lyle and Carter, dispersed back to their own lives, their own homes, the ordinary ongoing fact of being people who had done something and returned from it. He thought about Wren, somewhere on Route 9, doing the thing that came after what they had started. He thought about Gerald Aiken in the back of a federal vehicle, 61 years old, asking for a lawyer with the specific calm of a man who had spent 11 years believing he was insulated from consequences and was now trying to run the same mechanism against a wall that didn't move. He thought about Raymond Pruitt, somewhere on a highway tonight, coming back toward a city where everything had changed. He went inside. The kitchen was the kind of warmth that only existed in houses where someone cooked regularly. Evelyn had put together something simple. Soup, from what was in the refrigerator, bread, butter, the kind of meal that didn't ask anything of anyone but appeared and was sufficient. The children were at the table. Leo had both hands around a mug of hot chocolate that Evelyn had produced from somewhere in the cabinet, and he was looking into it with the reverent concentration of a person experiencing something they were not sure was real. Marcus was eating. That was the whole of his participation, and it was complete. Cody was eating more slowly, watching the room, the exits, the windows, the door, in the automatic way he probably wasn't aware he was doing. Declan sat down across from him. Cody looked at him. Declan looked back. Neither of them made a point of it. Ember was not at the table. Declan looked around and found her in the doorway of the living room. Not inside it, not at the table, standing at the threshold looking at the bookshelves and the lamp and the worn couch and the particular ordinary domesticity of a house that had been lived in for years, absorbing it in the way you absorbed things you had been without long enough that their presence required inventory. She became aware of Declan looking at her and turned her head. He looked at her, and then he looked at the empty chair at the table. She came and sat down. Evelyn set a bowl in front of her without ceremony. Ember picked up a spoon. She ate. The table was quiet in the way tables were quiet when people were eating and not performing eating. The actual silence of sustenance, the particular piece of food after hunger that did not need to be announced. Declan ate. Mason ate. Evelyn sat at the end of the table with her mug and did not eat but was present in the way she was present at things, which was fully, without requiring it to be about her. At some point, Leo finished his hot chocolate and looked at the empty mug and then at Evelyn. "Can I have more?" he said. "Yeah," Evelyn said. She got up and made more. That night, after the children were settled, Leo and Marcus in the spare room, Cody on the couch in the study with the door cracked, Ember in the small room at the end of the hall that had a window that faced the backyard and the fields beyond. Declan sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and his phone and worked through the list of calls that needed to be made. Renner. A family law attorney named Susan Garib, who he'd worked with twice before and who picked up at 9:30 at night without complaint. He talked to Susan for 40 minutes about emergency placement applications and the specific documentation requirements for a former social worker and a motorcycle club veteran to be considered as foster carers in a case connected to an active federal criminal investigation. It was going to be complicated. Susan used the word complicated 4 times in 40 minutes, each time with slightly different inflection. He understood by the fourth that she was not discouraging him. She was calibrating him. She was telling him the shape of what was ahead so that he went into it with his eyes open. "I've done harder things than complicated paperwork," he told her. "I know you have," she said. "That's why I'm taking your case." After the calls, he sat for a while without the phone. Evelyn came and sat across from him. She put her hands around her mug. She looked at him. "How bad was it?" she said. He thought about the driveway. He thought about Aiken's voice on the phone, controlled and cold, running the same machinery it had run for 11 years on a problem that machinery had never met before. He thought about the line of bikes. "Manageable," he said. She looked at him with the particular clarity of a woman who had been listening to him describe things as manageable for 12 years. "Are you hurt?" she said. "No." "Is everyone else hurt?" "No." "Are the children all right?" He thought about Leo and his hot chocolate. He thought about Ember's spoon moving through the soup. He thought about Cody's eyes tracking the exits. "They will be," he said. Evelyn nodded. She looked at her mug. She looked back at him. "The girl," she said. "Ember." "Yes." "She's been taking care of them for a long time." "Yes." "She's going to have trouble letting someone else do it." "Yes," he said. "I know," Evelyn said. "I'm not saying it's a problem. I'm just saying I know." She looked at him. "I'll figure it out with her." He looked at his wife. He thought about the 12 years of her, the particular way she walked into things without announcing it and without making them about her arrival, the way she had come down the porch steps and opened the truck door and said hi to a 7-year-old boy without warming up to it first. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "Don't thank me," she said. "Just be here for it." "I will," he said. She went to bed. He stayed at the table a while longer. He listened to the house. It made the sounds houses made at night. The furnace cycling, a creak from somewhere in the hall. The particular silence of multiple sleeping people that was different from the silence of a house with nobody in it. He had lived in this house for 9 years and he knew its silence. And the silence tonight was different, fuller. Less like an absence and more like a held breath. He finished the coffee. He got up and rinsed the cup. He turned off the kitchen light. He walked down the hall. He stopped at the end where Ember's door was slightly open. He didn't look in. He just stood there for a moment, listening. From inside the room, the slow, even sound of a 13-year-old girl sleeping, not the fitful half-sleep of someone waiting for the next thing to go wrong. Something deeper. Something that had let go. He stood in the hallway and listened to her breathe. Then he went to bed. Raymond Pruitt was arrested on Route 77 at 2:14 in the morning by 2 federal agents who had been waiting in a rest stop parking lot for 4 hours. He pulled in for gas and they were there when he came out, and he looked at their badges and their vehicle and the specific arrangement of the scene, and he did not run, which Wren later described as the intelligent choice and also the only one available to him. He was processed and charged on 6 counts including child placement fraud, conspiracy, and financial crimes, with additional charges pending as the investigation expanded. Gerald Aiken was held without bail pending a detention hearing. His attorney filed 3 motions in the first 12 hours. All 3 were denied. Phyllis Brandt was arrested at her home at 6 in the morning and cooperated immediately, which Wren said was consistent with someone who had understood, on some level, that the thing she had been participating in was going to come apart, and had been waiting for the direction it was going to come apart from. Warren Coles, the 3rd member of the task force steering committee, turned himself in voluntarily at the FBI's Cleveland field office at 9:47 in the morning with his personal attorney and a box of documents. Wren said it was the most organized self-incrimination she'd seen in 14 years of federal work. Victor Hale was arrested in a hotel in Columbus 48 hours later. He had been, apparently, in the process of leaving, which was consistent with a man who had been monitoring the situation and had understood, sometime in the 48-hour window, that the architecture he had built was coming down. He had not been fast enough. The financial investigation took 11 months. It eventually mapped a network that touched 9 counties across 2 states, with nodes that had been operational for varying periods, some for the full 11 years of Aiken's tenure, some more recently established. The number of children whose cases had been processed through the network in ways that ranged from redirected placement to full custody transfer to outcomes that the investigation was still working to determine was larger than anyone had estimated from the early documentation. Naomi Cross provided testimony in 3 separate proceedings. She provided it without visible emotion and with complete precision, and she walked out of every courtroom the same way she walked into them, straight, contained, with the particular quality of someone who has decided what they are and is not interested in being anything else. After the last testimony, she sat in Declan's truck in a courthouse parking lot for a few minutes and did not say anything. And he did not say anything, and after a while she said, "The child in Cuyahoga County." And he said, "I know." And she looked at the windshield and breathed once, slowly, and then she said, "They found her." And he looked at her and she said, "She's in a good placement now, in Medina County." A pause. "She's okay." And Declan looked at the parking lot and felt something unknot in his chest that had been knotted for 8 years, and he didn't name it because naming it wasn't necessary. Daniel Marsh went home with his Aunt Sandra 2 days after the federal hold was placed on his transfer agreement. Sandra Marsh, who had spent 4 weeks believing she had done something irreversible, who had written a note and put it in an envelope and not known what else to do, held her nephew in her kitchen in Kettering while federal agents sat in her living room taking her statement, and she held him for a long time without apologizing for crying because there was nothing to apologize for. The foster placement process for the Quinn children took 4 months. It was complicated, as Susan Garib had promised. There were hearings and home studies and background investigations, and a DHS review that required Declan to sit in a conference room in Columbus and answer questions for 3 hours about his club affiliation, his criminal record, 1 conviction from 17 years ago, disorderly conduct, 7 days served, and his current financial situation. He answered every question directly and without embellishment. He brought Naomi, who brought her licensure documentation and her professional history and the specific patient command of a room that she'd developed over 8 years of government work and 3 years of being smarter than most people she encountered in official settings. He brought Evelyn, who sat in the conference room with her hands folded on the table and answered questions about their marriage and their home and their financial stability in the precise, unhurried way she did everything, and who, at one point, when a reviewer asked whether she had concerns about taking on 4 children with complex trauma histories given her husband's occupation and associates, looked at the reviewer steadily and said, "My concern is for those children. I'm prepared to do what that requires," and then said nothing else until the next question. The process was complicated. They were approved, but the garage on Callaway Industrial Road opened on a Wednesday in March, which was the month when Ohio stopped pretending winter was permanent and the light came back at a different angle and the air smelled like something about to begin. The Harley that had been dead for 14 months was running. Declan had finished it in February, a week after the placement was finalized, working 2 or 3 hours at a time in the evenings while the house at the other end of the day was warm and full and produced the particular sounds of 4 children being children, and Evelyn managing the daily reality of that, with the undemonstrative competence that he had loved in her for 12 years. He had finished the engine, machined the carburetor, rebuilt the electrics, and one Tuesday night at 10:15 had kicked it over and felt the thing come alive under him for the first time in 14 months, and had sat there for a while just letting it run. On a Wednesday in March, he brought the kids to the garage. Not the whole club, just the garage. Just the machines and the tools and the smell of oil and winter leaving and the particular quality of late afternoon light through the garage door when it stood open. Marcus went straight to the bikes. He moved through them with a methodical appreciation that suggested mechanical aptitude was going to become a recurring theme in his life. Cody followed him, slower, but with the same quality of focused interest underneath the pretense of not being interested. Leo stood in the middle of the garage floor and turned in a slow circle, looking at everything. Ember stood in the doorway. She stood in the same doorway she had stood in 5 months ago, in November, with frost on her lips and terror behind her eyes. She stood there in March with neither of those things, wearing a coat that fit and boots with matching laces, her hair loose for once instead of pulled back, catching the late light. She looked at the garage. She looked at the Harley on the stand, alive now, chrome, catching the light. She looked at Declan. "That's the one that was broken," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked at it for a moment. "Can I try?" she said. He looked at her. He thought about 13 years old and the specific weight of a machine like that, and the way she'd asked it, direct, undefended, with no armor in it. And he thought about a girl who had run 11 blocks in November cold because there was no one else to run to, and had made the calculation that 2 strangers in a garage were better odds than no odds at all. He handed her his helmet. She put it on. It was too large, and she knew it, and she didn't care. She sat on the Harley. She couldn't reach the ground. He held the frame. And she put her hands on the bars and felt the engine idle under her, that low, steady pulse. Her face did something he hadn't seen it do before, something loose and open and very young. Behind her in the garage, Leo had found the jar of clean shop rags and was organizing them into a pile for reasons that were entirely his own. Marcus was crouched by the front wheel of Mason's bike, examining the brake assembly with complete absorption. Cody was standing at the workbench with a wrench in his hand, turning it over, looking at it like he was thinking about what it was for. Declan stood beside the Harley and held the frame and felt the engine idle, and looked at his garage full of children and thought about the things that couldn't be planned for and the things that couldn't be recovered and the distance between those two categories and the specific unearned grace of ending up somewhere better than you deserved. He thought about what Aiken had said. "You're holding a thread. I am the loom." He thought about what a loom was, what it required, the specific patient, invisible work of people maintaining the threads, generation by generation, without recognition, because the thing that got woven mattered more than who was holding the ends. He thought about Ember's face on the Harley. He thought about nothing else. The engine idled in the March air. Outside, the light moved over the lot, slow and golden and not in any hurry. Somewhere down Callaway Road a dog was barking, a single bark, exploratory, answered by silence. The beech trees at the edge of the property had their first buds, small and fisted, not open yet. Soon. Ember turned her head and looked at him through the oversized helmet. Her eyes were the color of creek water in winter, brown-gray and clear and very still. "Does it always feel like this?" she said. He thought about the road. He thought about the engine under him on the morning he'd ridden toward Mason's house with the rain in his face and the cold in his teeth, and the knowledge of what he was riding toward, and the choice, already made, that it didn't matter what it cost. "Yeah," he said, "pretty much." She looked at the road through the open garage door. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. Sometimes the things that couldn't be said found other ways. In the idle of an engine on a March afternoon, in the smell of oil and cold air going warm, in a garage full of children who were learning that the world contained rooms they were allowed to stay in. Sometimes family was not a thing you were born into, but a thing that was made, imperfectly, by imperfect people, in cold garages and long nights, and the specific, irreplaceable act of showing up when showing up was the only thing left to offer. The engine idled, the light moved, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Ember Quinn stopped scanning the doorway for danger. She watched the road instead, and she smiled.